Early the next day, the soldiers of the training corps gathered under a 100-meter-high cliff. According to the words of the instructors, climbing training will be conducted at this place. Therefore, the climbing days will suspend physical training, and although it may seem easy, climbing cliffs is a physical and necessary activity for soldiers. Being afraid of heights is not an option, nor is not knowing how to climb. The familiar instructor's bald head appeared in time. Instructor Keith walked with a dozen instructors in front of the crowd. He looked at the loose positions of some and other apathetic trained soldiers. Instructor Keith flashed a smile and said, "At ease." All the soldiers froze when they heard that. Takashi on his side felt a little numbness in his back. Every time Keith Shadis showed such a fatherly smile, he had no good intentions on his hands. Instructor Keith sneered, "Hey, look at your own pitiful appearance. You've only had a few days off, but look at the look on your face and your own confidence. Fear not. As a special thing to increase your strength and safety, there will be surprises during practice. All this guarantees that your strength will increase." Whoosh. What is this? A sudden increase in power? Takashi looked at Keith with a grim expression. Under the instructions, everyone immediately lined up under the cliff. If Instructor Keith says there will be surprises during the test, they definitely shouldn't be in the last places. This feels really bad. Should we kill ourselves to forget this feeling? Damn it. Yes, there are surprises. There should be surprises for everyone. Many people whispered, but no one dared to speak out loud. Instructor Keith didn't say much and started directly. Everyone get ready to start with the climb. The rope next to you is the support you will have along the way, but I recommend that you don't rely too much on the rope if you don't want to fail this test. This test was a simulation of what could happen if on a mission the soldier ran out of compressed gas in his equipment. Being in a high place was not at all easy to create a chance of survival. So this training at least offers to increase the skills of each of the soldiers to react in that kind of situation. Precautions have been put in place. Start now. After Instructor Keith said that, all the soldiers in the training corps tied the rope around their waists and began to climb the cliff. Many people were nervous. Takashi looked up at the cliff at least 100 meters high, which had a 65 to 70 degree incline, and became nervous. Will he die in this training, or will he reveal his Susanoo to survive? What an embarrassing moment it would be. He can't make mistakes. The soldiers of the training corps began to climb the cliff with the three-dimensional maneuvering equipment, but the gas cylinder of all the equipment had very little and it was impossible to use it. The mere presence of the equipment was to appear more realistic simulation of soldiers. As for the rope, that only a form of support that could be had if the equipment was made use of. Physical strength and endurance are the important issues in this test. The instructors use the three-dimensional maneuvering equipment to supervise the soldiers. They usually stay close to the soldiers and from one moment to another, they move the rope so that the soldier loses his balance. If the people hanging on the rope don't react in time and don't stabilize themselves, once they slip and fall, even if they don't die, they will suffer serious injuries and most likely can't climb anymore. Although they complained internally, the soldiers began to climb the cliff. After climbing 20 meters high, the instructors took action and flew above the soldiers. With a smooth movement of his hand, a knife gleamed in the sunlight. Get ready. I'm going to cut the rope. Boom. Without hesitation, an instructor cut Nelson's rope and the rope snapped, causing his body to tense up and react quickly, grabbing the lump of rocks on the cliff with both hands. Shit. Wasn't the rope supposed to be cut after a while of training? Grr. Nelson's body slid down the stones, but finally steadied itself. Seeing this, Nelson let out a sigh of relief, wiped the sweat from his forehead with his elbow and secretly said that it was dangerous if he slipped now. In fact, Nelson was lucky. Not all instructors were as straightforward as this one, and cut when they said they would. Some instructors are very treacherous, like Instructor Keith, the bald Instructor Keith. Instructor Keith was using the three-dimensional maneuvering equipment and was hanging not far above Iren's head. He held a knife with a cold light and was gently brushing Iren's rope. Iren raised his head and looked at Instructor Keith, climbing slowly, always paying attention to Instructor Keith's movements and the fixed grip point to rocks to be prepared. Instructor Keith's knife swung on Iren's thick rope for a long time, but did not cut it. Iren was so nervous that he was sweating profusely. Finally, Instructor Keith suddenly raised his knife and cut the rope. Iren reacted instantly, leaned against the cliff, grabbed the stones with his hand and adjusted his body to hold himself steady. After finishing this, he realized that something was wrong, because the rope was not broken, and when he looked up, the knife in Instructor Keith's hand suddenly stopped on his rope, and then cut Thomas's rope in an instant with a long blade in a lightning-fast manner. Iren. Huh. Thomas. How? What? Thomas, who was still looking at Aren's face with a smile at this moment, almost scoffed out loud, not expecting Instructor Keith to suddenly stop cutting Aren's rope and instead cut his rope. Shish. In a hurry, Thomas quickly clung to the cliff, and his body slid down half a position before he almost fell. After Thomas steadied his body, his forehead was covered in a cold sweat. Shit. Thomas wanted to curse, but seeing the instructor's bald head looking down at him over his head, he swallowed the bad words to himself. He couldn't be bothered. Next, Instructor Keith used his three-dimensional maneuvering equipment to fly to the top of Armin, a lovely boy and good friend of Aren's. Instructor Keith looked at Armin's nervous face below him, smiled and raised his knife, swinging the blade along the rope. In fact, he admires Armin very much. Armin's theoretical notes have always been at the top of the list. Many combat plans and analytical ideas for problems in dangerous situations are striking. He has a rare kind of brain and ingenious talent, but his shortcomings are also obvious. Physical ability, what a pity. All sports subjects are barely passing. This is not enough. More focus should be put on getting stronger. Not far away, Takashi, who was climbing, also observed Armin, who was being looked after by Instructor Keith. He discovered that the clothes on Armin's back were soaked. How much sweat he had to sweat for his clothes to be like this. In fact, Armin was about to cry. His face was flushed. He was nervous for a moment and then relaxed. Every time he relaxed, Instructor Keith raised his knife with a blank expression and moved very fast. So Armin did not dare to be careless, as any mistake would be disastrous. Instructor Keith simply hung on Armin's head all the time, until Armin almost ate Keith's movements with his eyes, then flew to the top of other people's heads to train them. Armin finally breathed a sigh of relief, lying on the cliff and gasping, as if a great weight had been lifted off his shoulders. Instructor Keith flew to the top of Takashi's head, paused for a moment and looked at Takashi, who was calmly climbing up. Takashi looked at Instructor Keith, a bit watchful, but not too nervous. He was now making use of his chakra to move more easily. He also had an omnipotent Susanoo that could save his life in dangerous situations. However, with his chakra was enough. If the going got tough, he would do his best to stay static with the help of his power. Instructor Keith just looked at Takashi and left, not intending to waste his energy. He has observed the boy below named Takashi. Although there are some bumps in the evaluation test, he usually trains very hard, and his talent is amazing. Almost always whenever he tries to improve his physical condition, his strength, speed, reflexes, balance and even brute force, endurance. Fighting ability is different from ordinary people. It is like a monster. The only one who can compare with him in this regard is the girl with the same surname, Ackerman. What is it with the Ackermans of this world? They are all monsters. What surprised him was that Takashi's theoretical courses were not bad, and there were no obvious deficiencies. Knowing that this can't be hard for Takashi, Instructor Keith wasted no time with him and rushed to throw the others to continue to excel. Anyone who has been served by Instructor Keith has a ghostly expression. Compared to other instructors who cut the ropes when you're not paying attention, Instructor Keith's acting skills are hands down better than movie actors, a real treat to train under his care. After more than an hour, there was a group of people lying on the grass above the cliff. Training to climb the cliff was not only exhausting but also very worrying. Aren took a water bag and gave Armin a sip of water. Armin had collapsed at that moment, and only noticed that there were many Aren in front of him. Thomas wiped the dirt off his pants. He looked around and found that Instructor Keith was not there. Damn, his bald head is so hateful. Doesn't he have any feelings? Takashi didn't know how to answer Thomas's protests. Aren and Thomas were a bit far away from him. He didn't know what happened, but thinking about Armin's situation, he estimated that Thomas's situation was very miserable. That's right, I almost died today, complained Connie. He also enjoyed a full surprise package from Instructor Keith. When he thought this training would continue tomorrow and last for half a year, he suddenly felt there was no quiet future ahead. Instructor Keith lived up to his words and squeezed everyone's bones. Actually, he didn't cut the ropes of some people, but still, many people almost fell down because of him. Only then will they be stronger in the future. Keith Shaddis looked at everyone in silence. Just today the Garrison Corps sent about 280 horses to a green field outside the training corps base. Instructor Keith stood in front of all the soldiers who were getting more and more anxious to try riding a horse. Go pick out a horse you like. These are all good horses, and there are plenty of them. Remember, don't fight foolishly for a horse and have a good day. The 104th Training Corps South currently has 257 soldiers and about 280 horses were sent to them. Most of the remaining horses are to be returned and only leave a minimal amount in case they get lost, sick or injured. Takashi was excited as he walked among the numerous horses. The horses had already been tamed initially. They were not wild horses that were afraid of people and did not run. Of course, it's not like they are too obedient either. They just stand there, walking around and exploring the place with curiosity. I used to watch movies about horses, so I had some respect for the backkick they used to shoot at unfortunate times. In this world, horses are used to travel long distances without making use of three-dimensional maneuvering equipment. Using gas in trivial situations is not beneficial because of the limited contents of the tank. Therefore, horses are very necessary in this world. Most needed for the exploration corps, who are the ones who travel outside the walls the most. And these horses sent for training and practice are faster and smarter than the others. But in any case, riding horses is still very tempting for the children. Even Takashi was excited to choose a suitable horse. However, Takashi knew that horses could become man's best friend, and one of these in the crowd could save his life in the future. Takashi, being dazzled as he walked among so many horses, walked without thinking much about choosing one to ride. Many people did not know what to do like him. Instructor Keith said that people could choose any horse and look at the temperament to have a better judgment in riding it. Takashi felt that the bald instructor was talking nonsense. All the horses were tamed before sending them here. Suddenly, Takashi found a horse with black and white hair. The horse, like all the others, possessed a strong and elegant look, but that was not the point. Takashi knew it was not an illusion. He vaguely felt that the horse's eyes were a bit cold and the horse's face showed a mocking expression. With a decision in his heart, Takashi approached that arrogant horse and touched a handful of fodder. He walked towards the horse and stretched out his hand to hand it to it. The horse snorted, looked at Takashi and then lowered its head to eat the offered grass. Takashi. Did he just look down on me? The atmosphere was a bit embarrassing. Takashi felt ignored by the horse and the horse didn't seem to be as tame as others. However, this was not his problem. Takashi reached out and stroked the mane of the horse's neck, but the horse was not happy and turned its head straight to look at him with its butt. Takashi. Sir, I have to ride him today. Takashi took the reins, led the horse into his hands and handed him more fodder. The horse raised its head and looked at Takashi without moving, as if it was not going to eat the new food that came to it. Takashi, who was very observant, seemed to notice something, stroked the horse's head and passed the fodder down to the ground, and sure enough, the horse ate the fodder some time later. This horse is the one. Takashi nodded with relief. Without hesitation, he took this horse, just because it was the only one who looked down on him out of the whole group. When their eyes met, Takashi's heart twitched and he knew he was the one. Takashi looked around and found that most people were still hesitating, not knowing which one to choose. However, some people had already chosen a horse. In the distance he looked at Sasha, who was feeding her horse. Takashi had understood that this horse should accompany him during all his adventures, so he named his horse Babas, the first name that came to his mind as revenge, and then started to feed the horse. Feeding the horses was a necessary task that had to be done every day. People must feed their horses once a day, so developing a bond between human and animal was necessary. Over time, the more special soldiers choose their horses, though many ended up choosing one at random. Takashi looked at Eren pulling a tall, strong horse with bright golden hair, unruly eyes, completely ignoring Eren's feed. TKs, with such a fierce horse, Eren might have to suffer a bit, Takashi thought to himself. At that moment, Thomas also approached with his horse. Takashi, look, how is my Dorito? Thomas said proudly. His horse sure was handsome, with shiny hair and a well-proportioned physique. Before Takashi could answer, his Babas became annoyed because Takashi, who was about to say something to Thomas, unconsciously stopped paying attention to him. Babas walked up to Thomas and headbutted him. Damn it, Takashi. What's wrong with your horse? Thomas bent down and looked at Babas with a bit of surprise. This horse is too wild. Hey, isn't my horse, Babas, too good-natured? Takashi asked with a proud look. Babas snorted, neighed, raised his head and looked at Takashi, motioning for him to continue stroking his back. Takashi was very pleased with Babas's performance, so the skilled horse was able to unleash his wise ancestral martial arts. Thomas was a bit jealous, and when he looked at Dorito, who only knew how to bow his head and eat grass, he suddenly became depressed. The mornings of the next month were all riding sessions, rock climbing, and a month later he alternated between riding and weight training. The next day, after Instructor Keith explained some riding knowledge and tips, the riding training began. As long as you ride faster than Instructor Keith, you are qualified. It soon became clear that riding a horse was not a pleasant thing, at least at first it was quite uncomfortable. Riding a horse and running off doesn't mean you can ride a horse, because fools can. Beginners usually don't have a good posture and make the horse's behavior flail. Once you learn the correct riding position, there will be no problems in the future. It is a preliminary learning to ride a horse. Then comes the speed control and communication with the horse. Usually you don't have a proper pointer planned at the beginning. When there was a connection between humans and animals, everything was easier. It was essential to understand the behavior of the horse and the horse to understand the intentions of the rider. In the last few days after riding, many people almost vomited, their hips ached and their buttocks ached, so they did not dare to sit down. An interesting scene appeared in the dining room. These days, many people are eating standing up. The worst was poor Aren. The beautiful golden horse he chose was really unruly. He had already been knocked down 3 times and suffered several blows. Mikasa was very distressed for Aren's safety. After a while the noble protagonist couldn't take it anymore. He threatened to eat the horse if it didn't cooperate in practice. Takashi secretly said that it was a pity that he had not eaten meat for a long time. Due to the fall of the Mary Wall, humans lost a third of their territory and the price of meat skyrocketed to unattainable prices. However, it was a pity that Aren's golden horse became friendlier in the days that followed. In this way, little by little the next month arrived. After 2 months of riding training, everyone at least learned to ride a horse. There is also more and more tacit understanding between Takashi and Baba's. Basically, her horse can respond quickly to Takashi's signals. Takashi can now call himself an experienced old rider. Run. In the empty wasteland, a group of training corps soldiers ran wildly on their horses, and Instructor Keith drove his own horse to chase after them. Anyone caught making mistakes would always get a surprise at the end of the day. Takashi took the lead, adjusted his stance, sat with a good posture, and Baba's rode into the dust. No matter how fast the others rode, they would be more than 2 horses behind him. The relationship between riding and fitness had nothing to do with it, because the fitness of the remaining training soldiers was not bad, but after all it was about a horse's own strength. In short, Baba's was really a fast horse. During the riding test, whether overcoming obstacles or comparing speed, he almost never lost. In terms of horsemanship, he was number 1 among the soldiers training. After 2 months of riding training, the soldiers could at least ride properly. At the end of the month of the year 848, a very important test began that would give a special simulation for the experience of all soldiers. Instructor Keith stood on the high platform in the large general yard of the base, pointed to a map of a special route behind him on a sign and said, "The riding training has come to an end for the time being. This time there will be a test of a march in a wasteland and the content of this training is very simple, so simple that any of you with your tiny abilities can easily pass." Everyone was now familiar with the bald instructor to such an extent that they have no resentment in their heart, and even some in this situation want to laugh a little. The test of a wilderness marching simulation is the last evaluation before the next month's days off, and although it is not included in the final score, it is also something very important for all the graduating soldiers to learn from. There are now only about 250 soldiers in the training corps. Some people in the riding tests were eliminated and some more in the climbing training. There are some currently injured, but as long as they are not serious injuries, they can continue in the training corps. The soldiers of the training corps in this test will be divided into 2 groups, each group with an experienced instructor and another with the role of analyzing the development, setting off on 2 different courses. Around the forest in front of the base, both groups will march 2 routes rolling the forest. After that the squads should meet at the destination, exchange information about the march route and return to the core base by the other squad's route, which is more or less a different route. The total distance is about 50 kilometers. Riding on horseback, the soldiers should carry their 3-dimensional maneuvering equipment. They should not ride too fast. They should spend at least 1 night outdoors before returning to base. Takashi knew that this type of test was done so that the soldiers would be familiar with important deployments. No matter what corps they ultimately go to, everyone at some point will have to fight for this world, and it is something that many of the commanders now and before knew. Instructor Keith, standing on the high platform, continued to spit words into the lecture and with a different tone of voice said, "Listen to me, even in normal times, you are all soldiers, you must maintain vigilance and the will to fight at all times, no matter what the situation is. You cannot survive without a developed sense of crisis. Be patient with this training and learn all you need to. This test is about increasing your sense of crisis and becoming familiar with this experience." Everyone will be in 2 different groups according to the list created, with 123 people in each group. The first squad leader of this group is Horatio Nelson. The analyst will be Armin Arlert. The second squad leader of the second group is Takashi Ackerman. The analyst will be Mikasa Ackerman. With the roles of squad leader and analyst, The two groups were ready to embark on their journey. These roles were to also simulate the roles of the instructors on the trip. Each person was selected according to their capabilities. Therefore, Instructor Keith gave an order and everyone must act immediately. Takashi quickly put on the three-dimensional maneuvering equipment, lightly touched Baba's head and mounted his horse. Seeing that many were still preparing, he took the map in his hand and looked at it carefully. On this trip there was no hurry. If he rode at full speed, the 40 kilometers were not far at all. However, since it was a simulation, basically everyone should be alert and travel with caution. Mikasa prepared a notebook and pen to record what happened along the way and at any time. As the squad leader of Group 2, Takashi carefully planned the route under the supervision of the two instructors. After all, there was no set path and the route they set will be followed by the other group. Mikasa at this point should be very careful to note down in detail the path they will take and the performance of all the soldiers in their group. If the four instructors discover that each other's marching route and landmark records are incorrect, then the whole group will have to have points deducted, and Takashi will naturally not dare to be careless. Otherwise it will be bad if his skills are called into question and he would not be the only one affected by his mistakes. Of course, they must also be on the lookout for any dangers that might arise on the march. Everything was subject to change and how each group performed. This training is just as Instructor Keith said it would be. Normally, it is not a difficult test. As long as care is taken, there is nothing wrong with the results. The question Takashi asks himself is, will there really be no accidents? With the characteristics he already knew about Exploration Corps expeditions, everything is always subject to change. Takashi looked at his group that was ready, and the other group were also ready. The instructors had not spoken so far. Everyone remained silent, watching all the development that the recruits were doing. Once the instructions were given, the selected leaders should order accordingly. Takashi and Mikasa were at the front of the group, looking at everyone seriously. Takashi said, "All right, we will start the trip now. We will start with a medium speed and after half an hour the speed will drop to half. Remember to form groups of 10, don't get separated and keep a safe distance. The groups on the sides and in front should keep their eyes open. This test is subject to change so we must be prepared." After giving the order, Takashi turned the reins of the horse and started to ride. Everyone else followed with a surprised look. The instructors put on a surprised look. There was no recruit with Takashi's experience that would fit his role naturally. One only needed to look at Nelson on the other side of the group to know that it was not an easy role. However, within moments recruit Takashi adapted to his role and commanded accordingly naturally. Mikasa on her side began to jot down Takashi's orders and the pace of speed. She also took it upon herself to pre-sign the initial route Takashi proposed. Initially, Takashi had placed the people he knew the most at the front of the group, to have an easier time ordering when mentioning their names. As in the original series, Takashi had seen and observed expeditions with experienced commanders. He knew how to order and what could happen along the way. Although it is a test, if it is a simulation, changes should happen. The long lines of horses rode forward. At the same time, Nelson, on the other side, set off with his entire group. Besides Takashi and Mikasa, Reiner, Berthold, Annie, Ymir and Thomas were in the second group. As for Nelson and Armin from Class 1, Irene, Jean, Sasha, Krista, Connie and Mina among others were in Class 1. It could be said that both groups were very balanced. Takashi was riding on Baba's back, admiring the natural scenery of the wasteland and, to be honest, it still felt unreal. After passing a rocky slope 2 hours later, Takashi turned around, dismounted and ordered, "Okay, stop and rest for half an hour." Takashi was sitting on a rock and the route was about to extend into the forest in the afternoon, which also meant spending the night in the forest, which was never a safe place. He took a sip of water and waved for the small squadron leaders to come here. "Is there a meeting?" Mikasa, Reiner, Ymir and the others approached after hearing the words. Takashi did not hesitate and said seriously, and it was rare for him to be serious, "We have to enter the forest at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and according to the schedule, we have to spend the night in the forest." Reiner frowned. "It's not a good option to spend the night in the forest." Ymir said, "There are many beasts in the forest. Do you want to organize a group to keep the safe?" Thomas knew more about Takashi. "What did you think of?" Takashi's expression was a bit serious. "The beasts in the forest are the second things we should worry about." He unfolded the map in front of everyone and said, "According to the normal speed, we have to spend the night in this area. There is only a small road that goes through the edge of the forest and connects the two nearby villages, which means there may be people in the forest. If it's an ordinary person, that's it. However, you can't rule out that there are thieves hiding here. After all, this place is too far away from the villages, and after stealing, you can hide in the forest. The same is true on Nelson's side, the two roads go through the forest and connect the two villages. Mikasa's expression was a bit worried, not worried for herself, but for Eren's safety. Little devils, we have a three-dimensional maneuvering team, so we don't need to fear common bandits, Ymir said with a mischievous tongue. The relationship between Takashi and Ymir was becoming normal after that conversation they had. Takashi opens his hands, who can guarantee that they don't have guns? Although there are muskets in this world, it would be hard to survive a gunshot. However, even though it might be difficult to have a gun, those possibilities should not be ruled out. Berthold said, can we spend the night outside the forest? Reiner shook his head. I'm afraid not. Getting to this point, the horses in the forest can be better maintained. Otherwise, if we spend the night out of the forest, it will delay the change of routes. Takashi continued, do not worry too much. The presence of bandits is just a guess, but be careful. Not everyone can be too far away from the main force. It is better not to take off the three-dimensional equipment, and even if it is removed, they should be responsible to keep it in sight. If they see something suspicious, no matter how small, they can comment on it without worry. If the situation is worrisome, you can subdue the enemy on the spot. If there is no chance of subduing them, do what is necessary to maintain your safety, even if you have to take lives. Everyone looked at Takashi with some surprise. Even though they were all soldiers in training, it was still unacceptable to kill someone. Killing a human and killing a titan were two different things. Thomas swallowed saliva. Killing, even if it's a thief, can be a very complicated thing, right? This is the real situation. If you want to choose between subduing the enemy with the possibility of getting hurt, go ahead, Takashi said with a sigh. Everyone looked at Takashi, as if they had met him again. He is not usually very rude, and he did not expect to be so resolute at a critical moment. After finishing the conversation, the instructors walked away along with the other soldiers. They had all been briefed, so they were prepared. Half an hour later, Takashi's group left again. In the afternoon, they gradually moved deeper into the forest. By this time, everyone was much more alert. As Takashi said, traveling a distance ahead, there was a path on the right side of the forest, connecting two small villages in the distance. This place would be too ideal to raid. If the forest really is harboring robbers, it would be good to be prepared to face them. Class 1 on the other side was much more animated than Class 2, since Eren and Jean were fighting again. Eren and Jean Kirstein's dispute was about a fox that they considered edible, but everyone knew that this was a trivial matter. After hearing Sasha say that foxes can be eaten, both of them with an arrogant look went hunting, and from one moment to the next they started fighting. Eren, who couldn't find any fox, stopped Jean and blamed him for being so rowdy. To be honest, the relationship between Eren and Jean is very strange. After the ordeal on the mountain, Jean understood a little bit about why Eren wanted to join the exploration corps, but the two hard heads fought very often over very absurd things. The strangest thing about their behavior is that no matter how hard the fight is, after a fight, both of them can communicate normally after a few days. Jean told Armin to write down what happened. Let's report it. Just put that Eren Yeager's actions obstructed the group's food supply. Fate because of his arrogant shortcomings. Eren was angry when he heard Jean's words and gritted his teeth. You bastard. Seeing that the trouble was about to resume again, Nelson immediately intervened and said, stop fighting, Armin, don't point that out, it's just a meaningless little fight. Armin was a bit overwhelmed for a while, but in the end, he secretly wrote down the incident impartially and completely, including everyone's reactions. There was a lot of high-pitched noise from Jean's side, yet no one noticed the possible danger in the woods ahead for Group 1. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Takashi's group had strayed deeper into the forest. Takashi and the others had been clearing the ground in a relatively open space. They found no anomalies at the moment, except for the hard-to-clean ground. Mikasa was recording some topographical features of this place, and Takashi was standing on a stone looking at the map. Most of the crowd sat on the grass to drink water or feed the horses. The old horse, Babas, studied the scenery inside the forest and began to eat grass, ignoring Takashi completely. However, Takashi suddenly focused his ears on the surrounding noises, feeling that everything was going well for the test that should be a bit more complicated in the first place. His experiences as a hunter and those things he had to pay attention to in the forest to hunt had been imprinted on the current Takashi, so he immediately acted on his instincts. Shish. Takashi jumped off the stone and immediately pulled out 2 swords. These are the ideal tools against the Titans. They are sword blades found on the sides of the body of the 3-dimensional maneuvering equipment. According to the theory classes, they are sword blades made of a steel alloy modified to be super strong. Therefore, they would work to wipe out any living thing that might exist in the world. What's wrong? Reiner and the others were about to ask, but Takashi motioned for him to stop talking. Takashi walked into the forest on the left side of the team, and Reiner and the others followed him silently. A soldier named Daz was in the forest, and the three-dimensional maneuvering equipment was laid out on the grass next to him. Initially he didn't want to take it off when he heard Takashi's words, but then he felt tired, so he relaxed for a moment in a place where he wouldn't be looked at. Daz, who was resting, didn't notice that a long hand came out of the bush and silently picked up his three-dimensional maneuvering equipment. His appearance was typical of black-hooded thieves. This thief was actually just a special test member of Takashi's team. According to the instructions, the group that pretended to be thieves would approach the settlements of both teams to rob and kidnap. This was something Takashi had expected. The test was very important to take into account all these factors. Unexpectedly for Daz, he was the first to fall victim to the test for not following Takashi's directions. Whatever happens now may be within the test, let's not rule out that they are instructors in disguise. Takashi slipped through the trees and shouted, "Stop." The instructor froze as he was caught, putting Daz's gear on the ground, quickly pulling out a knife and running towards Takashi and the others. "Let's take care of him, Reiner." Takashi gave an order and pointed. The others watched the surroundings. Maybe he's not the only thief. Understood. Takashi, Reiner and Thomas slowly approached towards the thief. Takashi's eyes shrunk and he picked up a stone from the ground. Making use of his chakra on the surface of the stone, he slowly prepared himself in secret. When Reiner was closer to the thief, Takashi threw the stone with precision. Boom. The stone flew straight towards the thief's blade he was holding with one hand, as fast as a sharp arrow. At this moment, the thief was thinking about how to escape from this place. It would be very embarrassing to be caught by some recruits. Metallic noise. The stone that had hit the thief's weapon directly, caused due to the great impact the blade flew out of his hands, and with a metallic clang it fell to the ground far away from the thief. The thief was stunned for a moment. He wanted to pick up his weapon again. However, Takashi had quickly used his three-dimensional maneuvering equipment to appear at the thief's back. The hooded figure of the thief stopped abruptly, and before he could raise his fist, a cold metal blade rested on his neck and a slight bloodstain could be seen due to the edge so close to his skin. Takashi looked at the bandit with indifference. "If you waste my time again, beware of losing your head." The bandit, who was an instructor, shivered. His eyes scanned the cold blade on his neck and slowly raised his hands to signal his surrender. At that moment, Thomas and Reiner ran over, grabbed the bandit's arms and held him tightly. Takashi on his side put away his swords and the blade that the bandit had dropped on the ground and picked up Daz's three-dimensional maneuvering equipment. The thief was caught without loss. As Takashi handed over the three-dimensional maneuvering equipment to Daz, he looked at the crowd watching the thief who entered the vicinity without anyone noticing and said coldly, "Daz, I think I was very direct when I mentioned that you should take care of your equipment if you decided to take it off to rest. However, you almost lost your equipment in the first second of taking it off. As soldiers, you must be careful and know that this is not just a test." Daz looked scared and was sweating profusely. "No, I'll be careful next time." "That doesn't matter to me. Concentrate on the test and don't make me waste my time again." Takashi looked at everyone and said, "Every 2 hours a roll call will be taken of the soldiers along with their equipment. We will set up a surveillance routine and everyone must move in groups of 2. Understood. Everyone started to move. They knew it was just a thief, but they couldn't be careless like Daz a moment ago. Looking at Daz, Takashi knows that Daz's training performance is relatively low, but he also knows that if he loses the three-dimensional maneuvering equipment, Instructor Keith will make him feel much more than embarrassed. He might even be kicked out of the training corps. Ignoring Daz, he looked back. Ymir had tied the thief with a rope. Mikasa grabbed the thief's hood, which was the face of a middle-aged man with messy hair and a scar on his forehead. Takashi approached the thief. "Tell me, how many people are with you? What kind of weapons do they have and where did the others go?" Mikasa had no affection for kidnappers and thieves at all, and kicked the middle-aged thief, and just asked if they were a group or alone. Takashi's eyes jumped. He didn't think Mikasa would act so rashly against a thief who was possibly an instructor in disguise. However, he adapted to the script and waited silently. The middle-aged thief looked at Takashi. His forehead was covered with sweat and he did not speak. Takashi directly pulled out the knife from his equipment and said, "I admire your hard bones. I can cut off your fingers one by one. Do you want to try?" "No, you can't do this to me. I just wanted to steal some three-dimensional maneuvering equipment. I didn't kill anyone. You have no right to torture me. I'm on my own," the thief shouted resentfully. "So you know about the equipment you were trying to steal. Now I'm more sure you're possibly an instructor." Takashi thought to himself as he brought the knife slowly towards the thief's fingers. Then you'll have to tell me what it feels like to lose a few fingers. Reiner, Annie, Ymir and Mikasa watched silently without saying anything. These people actually have their own backgrounds before they decided to enter the training corps, though not otherworldly. Their experiences are no more complicated than Takashi's. Thomas was a little uncomfortable with Takashi's behavior of pulling out a knife when the thief did not agree to tell his secrets. Thomas. Why doesn't everyone react at all? I'm the only normal person in the group. Stop. Recruit Ackerman. They are not allowed to perform physical torture with abnormalities that occur during training. An instructor came over and said, "You'd better speak up and tell us what you know. I'm not playing." The thief looked at the instructors and after some intimidation, finally the thief confessed most of the information he knew. He definitely thought that if it wasn't that way, the black-haired girl would cut off his fingers without thinking. When Takashi and the others learned that the group of thieves had 15 thieves in addition to the unfortunate one who fell into their hands, they were all worried when they learned that they were armed with swords and bows. Especially when they heard that they all went to Eren and Nelson's side, Mikasa and Ymir couldn't sit still. Mikasa was worried about Eren, but Ymir was worried about the goddess Krista. We're safe on this side of the forest, but Eren and the others will have a hard time. Reiner's expression was a bit heavy, although these thieves seemed to only want to steal their three-dimensional maneuvering equipment and had no intentions of harming people. In a direct conflict anything could happen. We should go and see the situation on Eren's side, Ymir said. Are you going to give up the training mission? Thomas asked. At that moment, Annie walked up and said, I found the tracks left by the fire the robbers made, and the tracks of 3 carriages. Of course, Takashi knew this was part of the test and perhaps he was the only one who realized this. Looking at the instructors, he made up his mind. He waved his hands and said, we will make a special group of our troops to scout the situation in Nelson's group. Reiner, Mikasa, Thomas and Ymir, you 4 will be in charge of going with your 3-dimensional maneuvering equipment to find Team 1 and brief them on the situation. Leave immediately. I will take care of briefing the rest of them on our situation. Understood. Mikasa couldn't wait, so she handed the logbook to Takashi. Wait a minute. Remember not to seriously hurt the robbers. I'm not sure but possibly this is a test, he said to Reiner in a low voice. Reiner was stunned for a moment. He looked at the instructor on the ground and nodded after recovering. Damn, if so Mikasa hit an instructor. Ymir smiled coldly and walked away next to Reiner a little calmer at the thought of that possibility. Takashi handed the record book and pen to Thomas and said, now it's up to you to be the recorder. Okay, Takashi. Thomas took the book and started to write the events now. Takashi also wants to go, but there are more than 100 people here who also need someone to guide them, and it is not safe to be in the forest at night. Takashi approached the crowd and after learning that Daz almost had his 3-dimensional maneuvering equipment stolen, everyone was much more cautious and didn't dare to be alone. The situation has been affected by the thief we caught a moment ago. I sent a special team so that the first team is informed. Takashi stood in front of everyone and pointed out, there will be 3 special groups during the night. The first group will be in charge of taking care of the horses, while the second to take roll call every 2 hours as we have been doing so far, and lastly the final group will be in charge of keeping watch during the night. Under Takashi's orders, everyone began to move in an orderly fashion. If the thieves' goal is only to steal the 3-dimensional maneuvering equipment, the horses could also be a target of their plans. Considering that the instructors went to Eren's group to try to steal them, Takashi was a bit calmer at that point. However, he was not to let his guard down against a possible enemy attack during the night. Later, in the dark, in front of the campfire, Takashi was sitting on a stone and volunteered as part of the group to keep watch tonight. It was already 9 o'clock at night. Even in the summer, when the stars and moon were in full bloom, it was completely dark in the forest at 7 o'clock. It was difficult to continue on the road. Takashi had assigned a special group of people to observe different spots during the night, while the others were lying in their sleeping bags. Thomas approached and said, Takashi, are you worried about the others? Takashi rubbed his forehead and denied matter-of-factly, no, they are all trained to deal with this kind of threat without any problem, but I hope they are okay. By the way, is there a situation? Thomas shook his head and noted, everything is normal so far. The horses were placed in a wide spot to be watched, while the shifts were assigned. Very well, you must be careful. Takashi was a little distracted. So far he thought it would be the end if someone killed them, just as it would be the end if a titan hit them while they were distracted. If they were thieves, Takashi wouldn't have rested until he saw them all tied up in a tree. Only until now did he understand that not only must he watch out for titans, people are also something he must pay attention to. This may be just a simple test, but that does not detract from the fact that it is very much related to reality. I could only hope that Reiner and Mikasa along with the others would arrive on time. Many important points for some of the other teams might be lost. There was nothing major happening all night. Takashi and Thomas switched shifts in the middle of the night, so from their side there was no problem. Early first thing in the morning, the sun slowly started to rise. After everyone finished breakfast, Takashi resumed their journey with the others. Approximately 2 hours later, they arrived at the intersection where the two teams were originally supposed to meet, but Group 1 did not arrive. After waiting a long time, it was only after a few hours that Team 1 arrived at 11 o'clock in the morning, evidently arriving late. Reiner, Mikasa and the others were also in Group 1. Takashi could see that the morale of everyone in Group 1 was obviously low. Krista's eyes were depressed and Ymir was comforting her on the side. Wow. Looks like they got the worst of it. Thomas muttered under his breath. What was that all about? Takashi was intrigued. You were right. They were instructors disguised as thieves. Unfortunately for Group 1 several got hurt. Annie said with a cold stare. Takashi approached and found that many of the cadets were injured. It seems that the instructors were not very careful with them. Eren, Jean, Armin and Nelson along with the others were on their horses in a very bad mood. Did it go that bad? Takashi asked Armin, who was riding his horse slowly. Armin was a little sad to tell what happened. The group of instructors attacked Class 1 at night and took Krista hostage along with other careless cadets. The soldiers were very uncared for. They didn't even have optimal organization in the group. Then they stole a lot of three-dimensional maneuvering equipment. It is not known how they were able to steal so much equipment. When it was discovered that something was wrong, they desperately tried to get the equipment and the hostages back. When there was a direct confrontation, things got out of control and a painful fight broke out between instructors and soldiers. Unfortunately, some soldiers were wounded by the instructors. Fortunately, Nelson acted immediately, ordering torches to be dropped and fire spread to better identify the assailants. Just when everything seemed to become more brutal, the team that was sent by Takashi surprised the instructors from behind, quickly ending the test. Some were injured in the ankles. There were cuts with swords, which was quite dangerous. Not to mention that in the forest there is no safe method to take care of serious wounds. With the medical level, it is difficult for them to recover from infections or much more delicate wounds. There was one soldier who wedged a knife in his leg, which generated considerable blood loss and quite possibly that cadet will die. Jean expressed her helplessness and said, if we had not been careless, if we had been alert during the test, there would not be so many wounded. No one knows the answer, and no one knows what the outcome will be until a decision is made. Eren did not respond. After one of his teammates was seriously injured, he wanted to take his anger out on the instructors, but Armin and Connie stopped him. This test was to be taken strictly without hesitation. This is just more than their fault for not being responsible. Takashi had many words to say to Group 1, but he knew that was not his responsibility and left that role to Instructor Keith. He could only leave one question in his memory: what would have happened if they were in Titan territory? After checking that everything was all right, the two groups exchanged waybills and soon after resumed their way without delay to the base of the training corps. Takashi called Mikasa, Ymir, Reiner and the others to join the group. Compared to the agitated state they left in, they returned a bit calmer. Although there were no injuries in Group 2, after all the injuries in Group 1, everyone was silent when they found out what happened in Group 1. Thomas suddenly said, "It is very possible that that soldier who was injured today in this test will not be able to graduate. If he manages to come out of this experience alive, he will know better than anyone that life is very important. The edge of swords, knives and arrows have no eyes or feelings. A normal person can die after receiving a cut. There really is no time to hesitate when on the battlefield, let alone in this world. That's what we face coming here. What assures us to go on living tomorrow? One little slip up. It only takes one breath for everything to go dark in our consciousness." Takashi smiled slightly and pointed out, "We have to fight for the fallen in the future. The least before my death I will make a significant change in this world." Playing and being carefree in this test, the cadet who was injured simply said he didn't want to die. What an idiot! If he doesn't want to die, why be a soldier in the first place? Krista felt guilty. Everyone felt guilty. Ymir said with a cold look. "It was reckless. I heard that Krista was the one who warned that there were thieves in their group. They really could have stolen even their horses otherwise," Takashi said with a slight smile. Regaining morale is only a matter of time. If they don't do it just by having this small loss, once they become soldiers and have more than just a wounded comrade, they will possibly drop out of the army. Thomas stopped abruptly when he heard Takashi's words. He knew what he meant. In the afternoon, Both groups returned to the training corps base, lined up in the long courtyard. Instructor Keith stood on the high wooden platform with a grim expression and looked at the soldiers. Instructor Keith had 2 sheets of the analysis during the trip and a route map with the path laid out and said with a roar, "I will post this on the bulletin board later. Everyone should look at the performance of the other class and compare it with their own performance, especially those in Group 1. I've told you many times. Even though most of you are teenagers around 15 years old, you are not village people picking up rocks, you are soldiers. Remember that you are always and at all times soldiers. Always be alert and maintain a will to fight at all times." Everyone fell silent. Nelson, Armin and Irene lowered their heads, even more embarrassed. Damn. Nelson cursed under his breath. He couldn't help but blame himself for not playing a better role as the leader of Group 1. Some time later, in Instructor Keith's office, Nelson, Armin, Mikaya, Thomas and Takashi reported on their assigned work in both groups. The explanation may be very detailed, but Instructor Keith needed to know what happened, especially the performance of both groups. After the report, Instructor Keith did not make any comments. Armin couldn't help but ask, "What about the recruit who was injured?" Keith looked at Armin and said, "He is under observation. He lost a lot of blood, so it is not assured that he will be able to return to the training corps later. Hopefully there will be no aftermath from his injuries." Armin was silent and did not speak. Mikasa patted Armin on the shoulder and said, "Let's go." Keith watched the 3 leave and looked at Takashi saying, "Your orders were very wise. I hope you won't make mistakes later." "Of course not, I'm retiring," Takashi said with a military salute. A few days later, the soldiers of the training corps took a few days off, quite a few days off, but they were also the last days off of the year. In the end, it turned out that the cadet who was wounded in the leg died from a high temperature in his body, not far from the base where his body was buried, where the recruits who died in all generations due to accidents and the result of various training were normally buried. For a long time, the training corps has trained countless outstanding soldiers to defend the walls and fight titans, maintain order and protect the king. Generations of recruits grew up here, or died, or otherwise began their legends. The days off have started. Some people go straight home to visit their families and homeless people stay at the base. No one knows what will happen in the future. As Mikasa said, this world is cruel and beautiful. In the office, Instructor Keith sorted out the results of the soldiers' evaluation in the last training. Undoubtedly, as recruits, this group of teenagers still has a long way to go. As for what kind of soldiers they will become in the future, he doesn't know, but he will silently witness and send blessings from here for all of them. Tonight, Takashi had a strange dream where he was swinging a dagger over and over again. The dagger was cutting meat and animals non-stop. Takashi couldn't do anything to stop it. Just when he thought he couldn't wake up, the dream abruptly ended. What was that? Takashi wondered silently. On the second day of vacation, some people took these days off to go home, but now more people stayed at the base to train rigorously. Unconsciously for everyone, a year has passed and now they are familiar with training every day. It could be said that it is a bit uncomfortable to stop training. Keith silently expressed his good humor at seeing so many corporals training at the base. In a warehouse, Thomas and Takashi were doing their assigned work at the base. "By the way, Thomas, are you really not going home this time?" Takashi asked Thomas while also cleaning the warehouse. "I won't go back this time. My performance over the past few months, I feel like it has lagged behind. How can I keep up with you if I don't train much harder than before? This time I'll stay here to keep training in areas where I suck the most," replied Thomas with a determined look on his face. "Well, if you go home at least you wouldn't have to clean this place." Takashi dragged a box of trash outside. "You're right about that, no need to mention it," Thomas agreed. Instructor Keith is really very good at giving jobs to the people who stay at the training corps base during the days off. Every second day after the days off start, he calls in a lot of the soldiers to clean all the buildings on the base. This time it was Thomas and Takashi's turn to clean the warehouse. Only until now he discovered that there were many things in the warehouse. The warehouse that Takashi and Thomas were cleaning was dedicated to storing damaged 3-dimensional maneuvering equipment, blades, horse saddles and the like. Instructor Keith, in addition to being bald, is very cruel. He directly ordered that we clean the base right after the holidays began. Thomas complained. Takashi, who was sorting various kinds of debris, suddenly found a sword next to a bow with a few dozen arrows. The sword was too hidden in the corner of the room, being covered by the bow and quiver of arrows. Takashi took the sword and observed the condition of the blade. Apparently it had no deficiency and remained in perfect condition. Amazing. Takashi looked admiringly at the longsword. The straight handguard and unusual pommel allow it to stand out from other swords. The exceptional craftsmanship combined durability with a realistic look, so if treated correctly it would serve him for a long time. Takashi knew that this was a gentleman's sword, something unusual to find in this world. Thinking it might be useful, Takashi put the sword aside and then asked instructor Keith if he could keep it for training. Taking the bow, he checked it for flaws. Shish. Hey, it turned out to be in good condition. Takashi touched the bowstring, a little surprised. Bows and arrows are useless to us, Thomas said disapprovingly and then looked at the sword with its sheath on Takashi's shoulder. There are no archery classes in the training corps, after all, bows and arrows are useless for killing titans. It can be used for hunting, just in time since we received days off. Don't you want to eat meat? Takashi smiled. Finally he could eat some meat. He remembers that time he ate bear meat, something very unusual lately due to the demand. Currently, there is a shortage of meat everywhere inside the walls and basically only nobles and businessmen with money can enjoy it. Of course, soldiers can hunt in training, inspections and raids outside and inside the walls. Thomas swallowed saliva and said somewhat excitedly, I can't hunt, can you? Of course, you forgot I'm a hunter. Oh, you have to bring Sasha too. Takashi felt that wasn't a problem, it was time to make a nice meaty meal. You mean Sasha? I heard that she is also a hunter and from the same village as you. Maybe with your help I can really eat meat. Thomas was also interested in trying the meat. The two were immediately energized in the warehouse, which was not necessarily clean in the morning, was cleaned before 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You can see that sometimes efficiency at work is actually related to attitude, completely different from working bored to being enthusiastic and positive. Takashi was also interested in being able to make the sword his own. He had to ask instructor Keith's approval first to get it officially and not steal it. On the other hand, Sasha was struggling to draw water from the well and Krista offered to help him. I can do it myself. Thank you for your help, Krista. Sasha thanked politely. Ymir, on the other hand, wasn't used to Sasha's overly polite way of speaking and scoffed. Hey, you, I've had enough of you. Excuse me. Sasha didn't quite know how to act. With that idiotic and formal tone you use when talking, why are you talking to us as you if we are of the same rank? Ymir looked at Sasha waiting for answers. Well, it's just that Why do I do that? Stop, let me guess. Ymir smirked and said, you're embarrassed to be heard speaking in your native accent, aren't you? You're so worried about what they think of you, but what a fool you are. You know how to hunt any kind of wild beasts, but you are afraid of people. You don't have a good reason to become a soldier either, do you? Did you run away from your parents? After saying that, Krista stepped in and pointed, Ymir, leave her alone. Ymir didn't want to let Sasha go, so she pushed Krista away with her head and pointed out, Sasha, you can't live lying forever. Are you always going to rule your life by what others think of you? I don't think you're that much of an idiot. Relax and focus on being yourself. Speak as you please. Sasha realized that Ymir wasn't specifically making fun of her. I appreciate the comment. That's very kind of you. What? I hope you'll forgive me. It's still hard for me to speak normally. In fact, Ymir also has her gentle side, but her experience is too complicated and her past is too dark. Krista hit Ymir. Don't bother her. She can't change the way she talks just because you say so. Sasha, decide for yourself who you want to be. All your words come from the heart. I like you just the way you are. Again with your lectures, I hope Sasha can change the way she talks. She gets on my nerves, Ymir said. Easy, Sasha, not everyone is as bitter as Ymir, said Krista as she approached Sasha. Ymir was embarrassed for Krista, and Sasha couldn't help but laugh. At that moment, Takashi and Thomas, who were a bit dirty, also came out of the warehouse. Takashi looked around for a while. Many people were hanging out and chatting. Thomas and he had the bad luck to clean the warehouse. Takashi saw Sasha and Krista by the well and walked over with Thomas. Hey, Sasha, are you free? Thomas couldn't wait to tell Sasha that they were going hunting together. What's up, monkey, you want something with Sasha? Ymir still replied with a vicious tongue. Thomas's smile froze and his face flushed. In all honesty, though Sasha was a food enthusiast, she was pretty, but he had no intention of hitting on girls today. Wow, the giant witch can't help but shut her mouth. Takashi smiled teasingly. Takashi, I try to like you but I can't stand you sometimes. I never expected you to befriend a monkey, how embarrassing, Ymir said as she looked at Thomas. Come on grandma, relax, we're not here to look for you. Takashi clicked his teeth. You. Ymir was angry with Takashi's jokes. A while ago she called her a giant and only her and Krista understood that joke. So she wanted to hit Takashi today, no other way to vent her anger. Krista hugged Ymir, who was about to go crazy. After what happened months ago, she had a good relationship with Takashi and she knew that her intentions with Ymir were not bad at all. Takashi and Ymir had also been familiar with each other. Even if Takashi doesn't talk much with Ymir, they knew each other's darkest secrets. From time to time, Takashi likes to make jokes about giants in front of Ymir, which infuriates Ymir to the point of losing his sanity. Although she knew it might be a touchy subject how Ymir acquired the same ability as Eren, he wanted Ymir to feel that it was nothing wrong to have that kind of ability. Takashi ignored Ymir and invited Sasha to go hunting with him, though at first he told her that there was something delicious to share with her. Hunting. Do you have any tools? Sasha was a little excited. It had been a long time since she had last eaten meat, so she missed hunting as well. Holding up the bow and arrow in his hand, Takashi smiled. I found it in the warehouse, are you coming? Sasha swallowed saliva, her eyes burning with motivation and said, yes, let's go hunting, we have to hunt in the morning. We want a share of whatever they find, we're going too. Ymir pointed to himself and Krista. Although he felt Takashi and Sasha could easily hunt some prey, Ymir pointed for Krista. Krista resisted a bit. Ymir, this is not good. Takashi smiled and said he didn't mind, it's okay, let's go together. He had no intention of eating alone. If he caught a prey, he would invite his friends to have dinner together. Krista wanted to say something else, but Ymir directly covered her small mouth with his hand. Don't worry, you are so thin, you won't get fat if you eat some meat. It's such a nice decision. Ymir, we'll meet tomorrow. Takashi felt there was nothing wrong with doing it this way. It might even bring his relationship with Ymir a little closer and find out a little more about her. They made the appointment to go out together tomorrow morning. Takashi and Thomas left happily. If everything goes well tomorrow, they can have extra meals and something more amazing, meat. After returning to take a shower, Takashi ran to the back mountain to begin practicing with the sword he found and a fist technique he remembered from his past life. Although he was inexperienced, he would at least try to carefully mimic the fighting styles. It's time to start linking chakra with my attacks. More than a year has passed and the physical qualities of Takashi's body are amazing. The amount of chakra and the way he can employ it have increased. Now, his overall strength has reached a very high level that very few in the training corps could match. Considering the Susanoo as his last card, he needed to employ all possible methods so as not to lose useful life unnecessarily. It sounds a bit silly, but Takashi didn't want to use his Susanoo if he didn't have to. And without the help of the three-dimensional maneuvering equipment, he wanted to at least deal with 3 to 5 meter titans with the use of his sword and chakra. If chakra could increase the sharpness and durability of the sword, he could take out titans easily. After all, chakra could be employed in many ways. The next morning, Takashi and Thomas came out in their training suits after feeding the horses. Sasha, Krista and Ymir were already waiting by a waterhole with their horses. Takashi, they sleep during the days off more than usual. Don't you usually run in the morning just after sunrise? Ymir looked at Takashi and started shooting direct words. I didn't think you would know what I do all the time. I should watch myself if I don't want you to eat me. Takashi said with a sad smile. Eat you? Your bitter old meat would taste bad. You're not to my taste. Ymir replied with piercing eyes. Takashi was not angry. That's how this woman talks. Except for being a bit more polite to Krista, everyone in general is treated like this by her. In short, Takashi is relieved that he is not treated any differently. It's okay. No good fighting in the morning. Gotta go straight on for the meat. Thomas said with a motivated smile. I'm not talking to you, monkey. Ymir said before turning around and starting the journey. This witch. Thomas muttered under his breath. Get used to it. Maybe she can be your wife in the future. Takashi patted Thomas's shoulder and climbed onto Baba's to begin the journey. Takashi, don't engage me with a witch like that. Thomas got on his horse and caught up with the others. How are you, Sasha? Takashi approached Sasha, handed his the bow and arrows as he struck up a conversation. Happy. I haven't hunted in a long time and I hope I can catch something big today. Sasha said with sparkling eyes. Of course we'll hunt something interesting, I'm motivated. Takashi smiled and said nothing more. There is only one bow. Sasha was motivated and Takashi offered her the bow to take over. Sasha, who was a hunter, had a guaranteed level, not much worse than her father. They all rode their horses, galloping all the way. After arriving at the site, they tied up their horses somewhere in the dense forest outside the station. The next step is to walk on foot. The road ahead is already too difficult to walk on horseback. It would be easy to scare off prey with a horse in this place. Sasha obviously has experience. As soon as I enter the forest, I carefully search for tracks left by various animals, occasionally finding the feces left by some animals not so long ago. However, soon Sasha realized the horror that was her teammates. Thomas accidentally scared a rabbit. When he found a beaver, Krista exclaimed, and then accordingly the beaver escaped. Beaver. Damn humans, this old beaver escaped from their arrows. Did they really think it would be easy to take me into their stomach? Takashi couldn't take it anymore and grabbed some plants on the ground. This won't work if we continue this way. See this kind of wild plant in my hand? We can find some wild vegetables like lettuce, mushrooms and arugula. By having this, we can make some good dishes with the meat that Sasha catches. Several people were a little embarrassed. Thomas, Krista and the others didn't know how to hunt. On this trip they have been doing them a favor in accepting them. Sasha has a good temperament, but Takashi is not that kind of person. Thomas wanted to learn how to hunt, but it really wasn't something he could learn in a short time. It's okay, we'll find wild plants and Sasha will do the hunting on her own. Thomas replied quietly, a little guilty about the situation. Okay, we'll be in the vicinity, let's search and not get too far apart. With the directions given, Ymir, Thomas and Krista walked towards the outskirts of the forest. Without the interference of third parties, Sasha walked into the forest and the process was too quiet. Some time later, Takashi was searching for edible mushrooms when he heard footsteps behind him. Sensing who it was, he asked, "Are you done foraging?" "We already have enough wild plants, just wait for Sasha to return." Ymir looked at Takashi with a calm expression. "I didn't think you would trust me at first. I still doubt your true intentions in keeping that secret from you." Takashi finished picking the mushrooms and pointed out, "What assures me that your ability can't be useful in the future? Besides, there is a possibility that there are many more like us." "You said your ability was very different. How different is it from normal titans?" Ymir asked curiously. "I don't know how I obtained this power, but what I am aware of is that I will use it for the future of these walls and all its people. I'm not sure if it's the same in your case, but in every use I make of my ability, let's just say I get sick in a certain way." After saying that, Takashi remarked, "It's like it consumes me. I'm sure my ability is for a much higher purpose than what the titans represent." Takashi started to play with the cards he had. He definitely didn't know how to explain his power otherwise. It wasn't related to the titans after all, and once his Susanoo made a presence in this world, he didn't know what would happen next. A noble motive. Something fantastic, but the tricky thing will be for the humanity inside these walls to accept you. What will you do if they start hunting you as just another monster in this world? Ymir looked at Takashi blankly. "Nothing. I'm sure my power will serve in some way. If they decide not to accept me, I will do my best to bring about a change with my own abilities." Takashi said, "I don't need to be accepted. I will build a world for the people I love, only that." Ymir seemed surprised at Takashi's words. She smiled slightly and didn't say anything until some time later. "If you can prove to me that you will win, I will tell you some things I know about my history." Takashi smiled and said, "I'll be waiting for that moment. Go back with the others, I'll look for Sasha." Takashi and Ymir parted ways and went in two different directions. After that conversation, he felt much more comfortable with Ymir and knew that he was quite possibly no one with evil ideas. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, when Thomas and the others were a bit impatient, Sasha and Takashi returned with a huge boar tied to a long pole. Sasha was full of excitement, holding two large rabbits in her hands. "Look, besides the boar that Takashi killed with his sword, I was able to catch these big rabbits." Thomas. "That's great, I'm starving, I can finally eat meat again." Ymir and Krista were sorting the freshly picked wild vegetables. Thomas felt a little regretful. Before he came, he thought he could help, but he only fooled his teammates. No wonder Takashi said he did nothing but collect wild plants. He picked a mushroom called delicious mushroom, which he picked by chance. "Sasha, Takashi, is it edible?" Sasha took a closer look and nodded, "Yes, it tastes good." Takashi also thinks that today's harvest is fine. Many core soldiers who stayed at the base could eat meat today. Rabbits can be made from mushrooms and wild vegetables. After Takashi and the others returned to the core training station, the group headed straight to the base kitchen. Takashi along with Thomas had been in charge of cleaning the boar. Krista and Sasha cleaned the rabbits. After everything was prepared, Takashi together with Sasha placed the boar on a spit that he made with the help of string and sticks. After hours of preparation, Takashi took charge of making the rabbits and completely took over the cooking. In the kitchen he found green peppers, potatoes, prepared 2 eggs, some onion, some ginger, plus the mushrooms and the mushroom that Thomas picked earlier. The ingredients are more or less complete to make something good. Ymir and Sasha were rigorously tending the boar. Krista on her side was preparing the conical utensils. Poor Thomas was depressed waiting for dinner. To be honest, several people are curious about what Takashi is going to make, but he has also demonstrated good cooking skills before, so no one thinks he will waste ingredients. Wearing an apron, Takashi cut the rabbit into parts, marinated them for a while with some ingredients while making a mushroom soup, added various seasonings and then heated animal oil, sautéed peppers, and then the meat was added until it was done. He then made mashed potatoes and along with the mushroom soup, served the rabbit meat in different dishes. Takashi experimented mostly in this dish with simple ideas from his head. He did not dare to use vegetables that spoil the flavors, after all he does not know very well how to accompany them. In the evening, 5 plates with the food Takashi prepared were placed in a corner of the dining room. The boar meat was being split into pieces suitable for all the cadets and some of the instructors who stayed at the base. Sasha on her side had already activated berserker mode, not paying attention to her image at all, eating profusely. That's why she looks cute, but few people really pursue her and Takashi doesn't think much of romance. Takashi, it's so delicious. How did you put all these amazing flavors together? Sasha asked, covering her stomach in satisfaction. She had initially doubted Takashi's abilities, but he showed her that he wasn't bad at cooking. It's delicious, much better than what Ymir has prepared before, Krista said admiringly. Ymir rolled his eyes. Naturally he didn't know how to cook, and neither did Krista. Takashi was speechless. He didn't quite know what she did, but at least it came out well. He took care of the flavors, and at least in his previous world this meal was just a meat stew. If he knew different recipes, he could have made more interesting things. Although the method and steps may not be right, the taste is passable and everyone liked it. If you like it, I'll write you a recipe later. Please give it to me. Sasha has started fantasizing about good days in the future. Thomas patted Takashi on the shoulder. At first they didn't trust your cooking skills, but after tasting a lot of your dishes I faithfully support you. Remember to never let this gift you have go dormant. The fries you made the other day were very good in taste and texture. Someday I will show everyone my culinary skills. Takashi did not speak. This shameless man had no idea what he was talking about. Once, Thomas offered to cook alone, but his fried eggs were burnt. What's the smell? It's so fragrant. At this time, some people came over for dinner. Takashi saw Aren, Armin, Mikasa and the others enter the dining room and greeted them directly to eat together. The boar meat had already been cut and dishes began to be served. Later, Nelson arrived after a hard day of training. Berthold and the others came in curiously. When Takashi looked at this, he shouted, "Come in everyone. The food this time is thanks to the hunting skills of Sasha and Ymir together with Krista who prepared the food." Woo! Enthusiastic applause. In this way, there are more and more people, and the atmosphere is very lively. After a while, more than 20 people gathered who enjoyed the meat for the first time in a long time. Annie tasted the rabbit and was a little surprised. "I didn't expect you to be able to cook. I thought a guy like you only knew how to immerse yourself in training." Annie and Takashi are not very familiar. In her eyes she had only seen Takashi train non-stop. He took the initiative to talk. Takashi thought to himself and replied by saying, "Well, I have some skills. But you don't seem to know how to cook. I'll teach you someday." Annie narrowed her eyes. Mina was right. Talking to Takashi sometimes could make people angry. Takashi was quickly slapped in the face with a handkerchief. Soon after, Annie started to cut the meat that was served on her table for everyone. She who hadn't come in contact with people much, tonight she gained some friends. "Yeah, I thought he, like Aren, couldn't do anything but train," Ymir interrupted so rudely. Aren, who was inexplicably affected at Ymir's words, blushed a little, but just as he was about to protest the meat got stuck in his throat and he almost choked. Takashi looked at this protagonist who on many occasions almost abandoned the mortals. He should take care of him with more attention. Seeing that everyone had almost eaten, Takashi patted Thomas on the shoulder. "Thomas, your help was amazing today. I'm going back to practice. I'll let you clean up here as a token of my friendship." After speaking, he slipped away without giving Thomas a chance to respond. Thomas. Me? Productive? Leaving Thomas staring at the table with messy glasses and plates. For a while, everyone followed Sasha and Takashi to eat and drink, and the days were pretty uneventful. However, happy times are always short-lived. One day, when they all saw the figure of the bald instructor Keith, they knew the good times were over again. "Keith. Guys, we haven't seen each other in many days. Do you miss me?" The days after that Takashi used them to train a proper martial art and swing the sword back and forth, infusing chakra into the edge of the blade. The designated days off had come to an end. On the training field, the familiar instructor stood on the high platform. It didn't take long before Instructor Keith began to sprinkle nice words. Your allotted days off have passed and many of you have weak muscles again, but rest assured that this time I will train you to death. All the soldiers in the camp were silent. Will the mythical surprise in the rewards and punishments of the tests return? Instructor Keith suddenly smiled. Let me share with you some news that will make you very happy. The climbing training that lasted about half a year has ended and will not be conducted in the future ever again. Yes, that's great. It should have been over a long time ago. We finally don't have to worry about it. Takashi looked at the people with different thoughts. The climbing training was to take away people's little fear about heights or difficult situations that may happen with the three-dimensional maneuvering equipment. Now he may think differently, but Takashi understood everyone. No wonder they are so happy. This training was torture and something where many recruits got kicked out of the training corps. This cliff climbing training was becoming more and more dangerous and tense. The assigned instructor would climb on top of everyone and cut the support rope. Other times he would just shake the rope to throw the recruits off balance. Many think that he would do. They cut their support rope. Many others fell victim to this adrenaline-filled situation. Every time this kind of training was conducted, for everyone it is a kind of torture, especially for the unlucky ones who were directly evaluated by the instructor Keith. Takashi had heard that within a month of starting climbing training, some would scream for their life. Others would cry while climbing with no chance of receiving help from instructors, and it was all real when he remembered what happened. Therefore, this emotion is normal for Takashi. Having thought about this, he had to start coming up with a plan for future training and how to act with his secret ability that could be loved or hated. There was plenty of time left, but he had to hurry. When the cheers from the crowd subsided, Instructor Keith continued without hesitation and pointed out, there is a very interesting future test and special confrontation training. The time of this training will be after the physical training every morning, 1.5 hours a day with a maximum duration of 2 hours. Consult this information on the announcement board. Fighting? Confrontation between people? What should we learn that for? Do you think it will have a special score? Everyone was a little confused. The score for hand-to-hand combat training was not to be included in the final evaluation, but everyone knew that it is very important. Even so, a special course would not be arranged for this year. The level of emphasis placed on this course also varies from person to person. According to the instructor's words, Takashi understood that there were special partners for the training, but you can also practice with other people, as long as you are not lazy. The instructor does not mind. The table of the couples had been announced. Takashi and the charismatic Jean Kirstein, Aran and Reiner, Mikasa and Krista, the short guy named Connie and Sasha, Annie and Armin, and so on. Today the day was sunny, calm wind, and the sun was clear. As soon as the physical training was over, the hand-to-hand combat training had begun. At a training ground on the hillside, Jean held a wooden dagger and said to Takashi, "Are you ready? I'm going to attack." Takashi made a fighting stance and said with a calm look, "Come on, come at me anytime." Jean wielded the wooden dagger and charged forward with agility. Takashi knew that to defend against a knife attack, it is most ideal to defend as fast as possible and counterattack without much thought. Therefore, Takashi was waiting for the way Jean was about to attack him. Seeing how Jean was charging straight at him, Takashi leaned to the side at the last moment to avoid Jean's attack. He grabbed the wrist where Jean was holding the knife with one hand and pushed it away from his body. Seconds later he hit with a kick to throw Jean backwards. So fast. Jean from a moment to this looked at the bright sky in cough, I'm too careless. Jean stood up with Takashi's help, feeling that he was too careless a moment ago, and would definitely take Takashi down this time. Jean prepared the offensive again, bent down a little, clenched the wooden dagger with both hands and charged straight at Takashi. Jean's speed this time was much faster and the strength together with the grip of the weapon is stronger. Just now, she was afraid of hurting Takashi, so this time she was going to do her best to attack him. Takashi's position changed and with a serious expression, he leaned his body forward as much as he could, and once the wooden dagger was entered straight to his stomach he hit with his forearms the hands holding the knife and attacked Jean's head. Burst. Jean once again fell backwards with ease. Damn it, what's going on? Jean was a little confused. In fact, in the original story, Annie used delicate moves and used more technique to deal with Eren and his opponents. All those who rush to attack are weak with technique attacks and decisive moves. Takashi is actually very merciful. He didn't use all his strength to generate serious damage to Jean's body, as well as he didn't use his chakra. Otherwise the results would have been more painful. I'll have to start attacking on specific points of the body. I must learn with Jean. Takashi thought to himself as he watched Jean get up from the ground once again. Let's go again. Jean was not convinced of his results. In the days that followed, the fantasy of Takashi crying and giving up made Jean suspicious of life. Takashi was improving more and more his attacks and movements. Day by day he was increasing the intensity of the attacks with Jean. Not again. Putting Jean down again, Takashi said to Jean, who was now very depressed that he had not achieved anything good in these last days, if you want to learn, I can teach you. Jean scoffed. This one doesn't add up to points, no matter how well you learn, so it won't help me to become a military police officer. Takashi ignored Jean's words and said with a playful expression, you really don't want to learn? Jean hesitated a little and was honest with Takashi. Well, please teach me some tricks. He thought that after becoming a military policeman, the situation may also arise where he must fight criminals. Therefore, it is still necessary to learn some martial arts. Some instructors were teaching soldiers different ways of attacking and defending, but it is impossible to teach them all day after day. During the next few days, Takashi and Jean learned some simple grappling and fighting. After learning something, Jean was eager to find someone else to fight. Not to mention that maybe many people are superficial in this training, maybe because they are not very interested or because they did not find an instructor who taught them well. Some of the partners were extremely tough like Mikasa, who very few dared to challenge. In the last confrontation with Takashi, Jean received a heavy blow. Her waist felt like he was about to snap in two and he fell to the ground on her side again, unable to get up for a while. Indeed, you are the only one who can beat me, Jean said with a shocked face. As for what it was like to train with Takashi, Jean said that it was smooth. Seeing this, Takashi shook his head and didn't dare to think that he could beat everyone without making direct use of his chakra. Although Jean always lost to Takashi, he was not beaten so hard only until the end. But Jean learned diligently with Takashi and went cheerfully to challenge others from time to time, winning some clashes and losing definitely less. It turns out that fighting is great, shouted Jean excitedly. Thus a month and a half passed. In the melee class on this day, Takashi was sitting under a tree watching everyone training rigorously. He had challenged many people and also taught many of the cadets different ways of fighting. He looked around and found that there were actually all kinds of gods in the fighting class. Marco and his teammates practiced seriously, and Jean ran to challenge the others again. Krista seriously attacked Mikasa with a wooden dagger, but Mikasa easily dodged it. Connie raised a snake hand and attacked Sasha with bright eyes. Takashi would be ashamed to say he was Sasha's partner. He then focused his attention on the glowing Eren Jaeger. S-burst. Takashi watched Eren throw Reiner, who fell to the ground. For some reason, he felt that Reiner was going easy on Eren. Takashi had to say that if Reiner was pretending to be weak, his level of acting was exceptional. He was doing quite well, but Takashi couldn't understand why he was holding back so much. What is Reiner hiding? Of course, Reiner might be hiding her true abilities, but she couldn't be compared to Annie from afar, who didn't hide her incredible fighting skills. At that moment, Annie walked past Reiner and was about to leave when she was stopped by Reiner. She then urged Eren to engage her. The proceedings were neither flashy nor brilliant. Eren was easily taken down by Annie. Annie had good martial arts skills and Eren was no serious match for her. Then, Reiner, who was smiling at the result, was hit in the same way. It's not like I threw you for using my strength. Sometimes weak people have to resort to defense techniques against stronger ones. Annie said as she threw the gun in his hand. It won't hurt you to know these kinds of moves. Annie let go of Eren and combed her bangs. For someone with the same aspirations as Takashi, your skills don't do justice to the dreams you have. What good will combat techniques against titans do me? Eren said with a frustrated expression. Do you still want to learn fighting techniques? Asked Annie with a cold stare. Really? Maybe we could learn our fighting techniques and get to know each other better. Takashi slowly approached Annie. In the anime, Annie demonstrated excellent fighting techniques. After her secret observation for 10 days, Takashi determined that she was a worthy opponent for a fight. Without making use of his chakra in a fight, he wasn't sure he could win. It's time to take on someone worthy to fight. Her skills are good to see how far I currently stand. Takashi thought to himself. Takashi walked slowly towards Annie and stopped not far away. Annie looked at him and suddenly smiled. I thought you wouldn't challenge me. Smiling and waving his hand, Takashi said without delay, I was thinking about it and you seem to have misunderstood my reasons. Although you are beautiful, it doesn't mean I can't beat you in a battle without damaging your pretty face. Haha. Apparently amused by Takashi's strange comments, Annie rarely showed a smile. There are sayings that you can't know a woman very well until she becomes your wife. Annie's expression turned cold right after she laughed, looking at Takashi without any expression. Takashi also became serious and signaled Annie, "Come and fight." The atmosphere suddenly cooled down a bit. Aran and Reiner on the side looked at each other, and at the same time stepped back to make room for the two of them, and then stared at the two of them. Annie and Takashi made fighting gestures at the same time, and did not act rashly out of caution. Takashi narrowed his eyes and looked at Annie's fighting stance with her arms clenched and fists raised in front of her chest. He also knew about some martial arts in his previous life. What Annie uses seems to be Muay Thai, which is one of the most dangerous martial arts in the world. I honestly didn't know if Muay Thai existed in this world, but Annie's stance and way of attacking are characteristic only of that martial art. At this moment, many people looked sideways and others stared directly. Takashi on the other hand showed a standard boxing stance. After all, this martial art was the fruit of his nights of training for a long time. Even if Annie is not very strong, her fighting style was very eye-catching all over the place because of the way she defeated stronger opponents. And when Annie easily dealt with Aran and Reiner at this time, she attracted a lot of attention from the surroundings. Takashi and Annie ignored the people around them. In an instant, the two moved at the same time, running towards each other. Annie swept a low blow with her long leg towards Takashi's ankles. When she saw this, Takashi also responded with the same blow immediately. Burst. The impact came and the two collided their legs. Takashi raised his eyebrows. The girl who looked very thin was explosive in strength. Her punches could be a bit faster. The two sides retracted their legs almost at the same time. Takashi clenched his fists, and after starting to use footwork, his right hand stretched like a whip towards Annie's face. The method and movements of boxing touch are extremely strong, generating a fierce punching style and sometimes mixed with a series of lethal combinations. Takashi knew Muay Thai has incredible kicks, probably the best knees and elbows in the game, and some decent punches as well. His body stiffening techniques are incredible and they have a pretty good clinch game. But if this technique could have weaknesses, well, her footwork is something that makes it very difficult for her to move. She lacks a lot of lateral movements, so you could say that rough boxing could be one of her weaknesses if you are careful. Annie put her hands upright in front of her chest to defend herself and blocked Takashi's direct attack. After taking the blow, Takashi landed another series of fast and hard combinations. Annie had no chance to counter Takashi's continuous blows, so she merely dodged while backing away. Takashi was surprised. Even if her punches were not at full strength, they were effective in suppressing Annie's attacks. After a stalemate for a moment, when Takashi's stormy attack stopped for a moment, Annie precisely grabbed Takashi's left arm with her left hand, passed her right arm under Takashi's left armpit and pushed her hand under Takashi's chin with a strong grip. At the same time, she lashed out with her right leg behind Takashi's leg. Takashi tilted his head and fell backward uncontrollably. At that moment, Takashi used all his strength to pull his hand out of Annie's grip and his hand wrapped around the slender waist, dropping them both to the ground. Something nice. Takashi, who lost his balance, fell backwards to the ground, rolled over and got up again. Annie, who was thrown off by Takashi's brute force, rolled away from Takashi the impact and quickly got to her feet. The four eyes met, and the eyes confirmed, doubting for a moment which of the two was losing. They both looked at each other indifferently and didn't speak, and again gestured to face each other. That's amazing. Aran swallowed saliva and was a little surprised. He hadn't seen much of the fight at this point. Reiner didn't speak, just stared at the two of them. His frowning eyes watched Takashi's performance with unfamiliar thoughts. There were more and more people around. Mikasa, Ymir, Sasha, Marco, Jean, Krista, Connie and the others all gathered at some point, but they didn't say a single word. Takashi looked at Annie on the opposite side. At first glance the match seemed evenly matched, but he actually had the upper hand in this fight. He knew that Annie's fighting style doesn't have many combinations, and although her punches can be fast, they lack different combinations. After Annie took him down, his grappling and dropping strength were not enough to keep him pinned. It can be said that he was careless a moment ago and did not use his footwork to dodge Annie's headlock. Suddenly, Annie took the initiative to attack Takashi and waved a somewhat delicate but powerful fist. Annie's flexible and quick fists hit him like raindrops, and Takashi was a little tired to keep defending the blows. Annie's fists were not too powerful, at least according to her current physical state, but they were too sharp and fast. No space could be found between them unless she ignored the physical damage and countered it with a combination of effective blows. Annie, who had the upper hand, suddenly changed her movement and a sharp elbow struck Takashi's chest with her right hand. Takashi's pupils shrank, his arms quickly crossed to block the blow. There was nothing magical about it, just a defensive posture. At this moment, the corner of Annie's mouth was slightly twisted, with a quick twist left leg attacked from behind Takashi's legs and her left hand pushed her elbow to attack. All these moves were done in an instant, and it could be said that the elbow that suddenly changed the movement was ready to impact Takashi's body. Annie expected that Takashi would have to adjust his body to block the elbow from his right hand. However, Takashi quickly backed away, yet after drawing a distance from Annie, a high-speed swift kick was directed at his head. Takashi's heart clenched and he realized that he had been tricked, but it was too late. He concentrated and tried to defend his chest so much that he completely ignored a superior attack. Annie's right ankle kick hit Takashi's head. Due to the slight imbalance and that Annie had made an unforeseen turn, he couldn't dodge it. Takashi fell to the ground and rolled once before getting slightly embarrassed. The audience suddenly exclaimed quietly. In fact, not many people could see why that happened at this moment, but instructor Keith, who was secretly watching not far away, still understood. Keith is very clear that as long as it's not a crushing situation, fighting is always a battle of wits and bravery, and Annie's feinted elbow is specially designed to cheat Takashi's speed. Takashi looked at Annie blankly. In terms of skills, he completely lost a moment ago. This woman started practicing from the womb. He felt he had underestimated her, not only Muay Thai, but also some kind of jiu-jitsu. This girl is amazing. He didn't know that Annie had been practicing martial arts since she was a child, and she was quite talented. When he was very young, Takashi remembers playing hide and seek with her father. After all, Takashi has only been practicing boxing for at least half a year and there was no opportunity for real combat. If he doesn't cheat now by making use of his chakra, he really couldn't win. Takashi and Annie faced each other again, and a large group of people watched intently at all the clever combinations of attacks the two performed. "Hey, Takashi, are you okay?" Ymir shouted with a venomous tongue. Takashi was in no mood to answer that witch. Annie looked at Takashi and showed an inexplicable smile. "Takashi, can't you fight me with all your might? Why do you despise a weak woman like me?" Some of Takashi's scalps were numb. This was the first time he felt that a woman's intuition was terrifying. Takashi's expression didn't change. "My fault. I won't keep my hands reserved in the future. I hope you won't cry when the time comes." "Is that so?" After expressing her thoughts, Annie regained her icy face, showing neither joy nor anger. Taking a deep breath, Takashi dismissed all distracting thoughts and concentrated on what he was about to do. He adopted a standard boxing sparring stance. Chakra concentrated on his fists and legs, ready to make only one attacking combination. Suddenly, Takashi charged towards Annie. With speed he slid across the ground, fists clenched. His movements were crisp and his chakra penetrated through different parts of his body, elbows, fists, hips, knees and feet. By the time the increased force is exerted throughout her body, she is as strong as a bull. The momentum moves with the chakra and the speed is as fast as lightning. Annie was constantly defending, retreating and dodging as she prepared to attack. She was steady and aggressive with some attacks, and occasionally kicked a couple of times to try to disrupt Takashi's rhythm. But this time Takashi gave her no chance. Her feet planted on the ground and now that she had closed the distance she didn't plan to move. Then suddenly a kick broke Annie's rhythm. This time, Takashi's strength was enough to open her defense and she used a combination of light punches and unleashed a powerful punch straight to her stomach. However, Takashi retracted his punch and with a backward leap he lassoed a swift kick with his right leg. Burst. A dull physical crash sounded. Annie was hit by a kick and went flying. With a thud, she fell to the ground a little ways away and rolled several times before coming to a stop. The audience was silent, unlike Annie, who knocked Takashi down with her subtle movements and calculations. Takashi's attacks were fast and fierce. One could say that his attacks were not as flashy as Annie's. After all, this is a fast boxing technique, but this time Takashi completely ignored the defense and changed the move by attacking with a kick. Of course, Takashi did not hold a grudge against Annie, otherwise her attack would have been more serious. Takashi made sure not to hit in a serious area where it could generate a fracture or painful aftermath. He only struck suddenly and slowed the force, changing it to a thrusting force. "That fucker. I'm going to kill him with my bare hands," Bertholdt muttered in a crazed voice as he watched her attack Annie. "Calm down, Bertholdt." Reiner held Bertholdt's arm tightly and pointed. "This time, you'll get your chance later, but you don't want to be seen with that expression on your face, so calm down." I'm so sorry. I have to get out of here," Bertholdt said with a sad expression. He looked confused. His gaze was fixed on Takashi the whole time. "Don't do anything stupid," Reiner said in a low voice. Ymir looked towards Bertholdt and said, "What, is it so hard for him to see his love being brought down like that?" Reiner flashed a nervous smile and said, "He feels bad. He has always been very respectful to women and it angers him that a man would fight so aggressively with a woman. Well, next time he can fight him instead of Annie. What an idiotic thing to be angry about." Ymir ignored Reiner and looked at Takashi with a smile. Cough. Cough. Annie coughed a couple of times, lay on the ground for a while and then slowly got up. Takashi was not completely lacking in emotional intelligence, so he stepped forward to help her up. At this moment, both of their training uniforms were dusty. "Where did you learn this unreasonable boxing technique? Was that your real strength?" Annie could feel that this set of movements belonged to a system and was quite irritable. The collision at this moment almost made her turn away, and she secretly scolded Takashi for being a reckless man who didn't know how to love women, but at the same time she was a little curious. Takashi smiled and said a few words superficially. "That was all my strength. The fighting technique is one that combines very fast footwork and lethal combinations. From what I saw, your fighting style has disadvantage in that aspect." "Do I have to tell her that I was watching her for a while?" Annie was surprised. "Very convenient. The speed and combinations you were doing, I couldn't stop them without taking direct hits." Takashi was stunned for a moment. He knew that the boxing was very fast and his combinations could become some of the most effective against Muay Thai masters. "Yeah. I can't say I could beat you if I didn't use all my strength. You are someone with incredible fighting skills," Takashi said with a smile. Annie lowered her head and suddenly felt somewhat out of place. Why did she suddenly point out that she couldn't stop Takashi's combinations? She felt weird and at the same time different. When he looked at the dust on Annie's body and some messy hair, Takashi couldn't help but feel a little guilty. He reached out and smoothed Annie's messy blonde hair, which was a bit of an intimate move. Annie was surprised for a moment and took a little while to react. She patted Takashi's hand and took a step back. Her expression could be defined as unnatural. Takashi was speechless. He really didn't think much of it at the moment, but then he felt it was a bit bold and regretted it. It seemed he had misunderstood. There was an explosion of boos from the audience, and Berthold's face was even paler in the distance. He slowly returned to normal after seeing Annie take Takashi's hand away. With a teasing expression on her face, Ymir said directly, "See, that's the result of trying to flirt after hitting a woman. Right, Sasha?" "Huh?" Sasha was surprised when Ymir mentioned her name. "Are you just going to stand there when your man is being taken away from you?" Ymir put her arm around Sasha's neck. "I don't know what you're talking about. Takashi and I are just friends," Sasha said with a nervous smile. "Really? You have to be smart. Many others might get their claws on what can be yours in the future." Ymir let go of Sasha and patted her shoulder. Sasha felt uncomfortable with Ymir's words. She was only looking at Takashi as a friend. Hearing Ymir's sharp comments, Takashi didn't know how to respond, but fortunately, Instructor Keith helped him when he approached the scene. Clap 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 clap. Don't misunderstand the scene, these are just claps. A burst of applause suddenly sounded from behind, and everyone looked back in bewilderment, only to find that Instructor Keith and several combat class instructors slowly approached. Instructor Keith nodded his head to Takashi and Annie, then looked at everyone. "Did you look at it? People who were lazy in melee training made such an impressive display, aren't you ashamed? Melee training doesn't add up to points, but so many of you trained so hard. In the end, all that time is not a waste for you. Now I ask you, for those of you who didn't take these classes seriously, can you do anything against people with those fighting skills? You must remember that these are not just titans you must face in the future, and you will not always have a weapon in your hands. Remember, practice rigorously and don't be lazy in the future." Instructor Keith paused, pointed at Takashi and Annie and said, "If you have this level of combat, from now on I can pretend I don't see their laziness." Of course he knew Takashi and Annie were being lazy in training, but he didn't care because they didn't need to. He knew they had certain skills to take this training lightly. No matter how good the capes could be at hiding, nothing could escape under her hair. Instructor Keith continued as he looked at the crowd with a serious expression. "We have taught you the basics of martial arts. Watch your fists, your elbows must be close to your chest. The instructors will teach you basic moves and nifty skills, ask for tips and practice harder. And as a result, you won't be beaten by thieves once you become a military policeman." Instructor Keith left after speaking and many people bowed their heads. It is true that many people in this class are slacking off, and at least almost half of them have not trained seriously during all this time. After that, the class became a little livelier. Eren and Armin switched to their opponents. Aren started asking Annie for advice. Of course, he also invited Takashi from time to time. Although he learned alone, Takashi showed no mercy and almost taught him everything he knew. Then, Aren's partner, Reiner, faced again and was surprised to find out that he gradually couldn't beat Aren. One day at the training camp, Aren grabbed the wooden knife and stabbed straight at Annie at full speed, but Annie dodged with flexibility. Burst. Aren tripped over Annie's foot and fell to the ground. Cough. Annie, your punches are still fierce. Aren got up from the ground slowly. You're showing no mercy in your attacks. You're always rushing with all your might to hurt me. Shouldn't you be nice to girls? Annie's expression was slightly weak. Aren disagreed. I think Takashi is right. You shouldn't be merciful just because your opponent is a woman. Do your best to respect your opponent. Annie's expression was a bit helpless. Don't listen to his fallacies and heresies. Did you learn this from him? Takashi's boxing method is too difficult. I don't understand it very well, so I have to ask his advice all the time. You mean mine is easier to learn? Annie asked with a cold expression. Hearing no answer, she remarked, Really? Then you should study hard. Annie lunged at Aren and smashed her left fist into Aren's face. Aren's expression changed and he raised his hand to block. Annie suddenly changed her movements and bent down. She lowered her head, slipped her left arm under Aren's left arm, and used her other arm to hold Aren's neck tightly. Then he threw him to the ground with all his might. By the way, I meant to tell you yesterday, learn to talk properly to women. Aren fell to the ground firmly and his face was reddened from being strangled hard. I want to learn this trick too. Teach me how to do it. At some point, Mikasa approached with a murderous look on her face. Annie let go of Aren and turned her head to look at Mikasa. They looked at each other and their eyes were a bit cold. Both of them are one of the best female soldiers in the whole class. In fact, they had noticed each other before, but they didn't communicate much. Annie looked at the expressionless Mikasa. Forget it, you don't look like you need to learn this. These moves are only useful for weak people. Mikasa didn't speak, just looked at Annie blankly. Aren has been learning martial arts from Annie recently, and has gotten a bit closer to her because of the demonstration fight she did with Takashi. Although Aren often learns from Takashi, that nasty boy is a man, and Anne is different. She is not only powerful, but also a beautiful woman. So now she was very upset. Annie adopted a fighting stance, but I'm also curious if this will work on the beasts. Mikasa was unmoved and looked at Annie coldly. Obviously, now there was about to be a fight of beauties. Cough, of female soldiers. Aren stood up, looked at Mikasa and Annie and muttered to himself, are they going to face each other? With a strong desire to survive, he unconsciously took 2 steps back, then felt that he had bumped into someone. He turned his head to look and discovered that a crowd of people watching the fun had gathered from some time ago. Reiner looked at Mikasa and Annie who were facing each other. Who do you think will win, Aren? The last time he went to challenge Mikasa, he was beaten badly. Unfortunately, he was also defeated by Annie in turn. He tried his best both times, but the results were less than ideal. Annie. Marco said. Marco's best friend Jean jumped up excitedly and said, Mikasa, it must be Mikasa. I can bet my dinner tonight. Connie reached out and nudged Takashi, who was standing next to her. Who do you think will win? Takashi had fought Annie and beaten her, but these results were not entirely clear to the audience. Takashi pretended to be very calm and said, Annie has technique, fighting experience and battle perception. However, Mikasa is strong, fast and overall is much stronger than Annie. If I'm honest, I don't know. Any result would generate controversy to this question. In the anime and manga, this fight never happened. The author of the same work is said to have pointed out that the battle was stopped by an instructor shortly before it was to happen, so Takashi wasn't quite sure what was about to happen. He looked at his empty hands and felt a little regretful. It would be nice to have something to eat. Ignoring everyone's discussion, Mikasa slowly walked towards Annie. If she can beat Annie, she will do it with all her abilities. Her strength won't be able to hold back like Takashi did. Mikasa slowly approached Annie, and almost instantly, the 2 girls moved at the same time. Mikasa ran towards Annie as fast as a leopard, using both hands and feet, punches and elbows. She attacked Annie directly with a tidal wave of continuous attacks. Annie retreated again and again. Her strength and speed were obviously no match for Mikasa's. Annie held back the pain in her arms. She vigilantly blocked and held back Mikasa's attacks and steadied her movements. Every now and then she would counterattack. Burst. Mikasa's sidekick was blocked by Annie's bent knee. Annie stepped forward and the 2 front legs crossed. Annie hugged Mikasa's left hand with her left hand, wrapped her right hand around Mikasa's neck like a beautiful snake. Mikasa then reacted. Quickly, her right arm hugged Annie's waist tightly. The two were entangled in an ambiguous posture, but each exerted their physical strength on the other, and it was difficult for both parties to keep their balance. It can't be such a heated fight, Takashi thought excitedly. Mikasa and Annie fell to the ground at the same time, tangled and rolled around for several turns before separating, and then quickly got up at the same time. At this point, they both had some dust on their clothes, their hair was in disarray, and they looked a little embarrassed. Neither Mikasa nor Annie had any intention of fixing their appearance, and they looked at each other indifferently. After a moment of confrontation, Mikasa and Annie ran towards each other again, with no intention of stopping. It seems that if there is no winner, it's impossible for them to stop. Bang. Peefed. This time, the two sides didn't keep their hands, fists covered their faces, elbows hit their chests, kicks hit their legs. No matter how hard they hit each other, they didn't stop. The soldiers in the vicinity were stupefied. Mikasa's attack was powerful, and her movements were lightning fast, gaining the upper hand. Annie can only defend first against this arrogant attack, with a cold look in her eyes, waiting for the opportunity to find fault. In terms of the skills of unloading, grabbing, holding and throwing, Annie is better, but Mikasa's physical fitness is far superior to ordinary people, and strength and speed are higher than Annie's. In addition, Mikasa is not completely pressed by strength and also has extraordinary fighting skills. However, Mikasa's current fighting skills are not systematic and relatively scattered, but it will be difficult to tell in the future. Takashi discovered that Krista on the right had covered her small mouth and seemed to be frightened by the brutal game of the two girls. What's wrong? It's for sure that Ymir is more aggressive, I can't help but say it, Takashi said quietly. Mina was sweating on her forehead. Is it really okay to hit like that? Aren't they afraid of disfigurement? Not only girls, but many masculine men also feel a little afraid. This is not at all a normal training fight. On the field, a round of attacks was blocked or missed. Mikasa's offensive slowed down and Annie instantly grabbed Mikasa's hands and placed them in front of her. Burst. Mikasa and Annie collided with each other, their foreheads touched, their eyes met and the two beautiful faces almost kissed. Is it a kiss? Takashi felt that this was not the right script of the fight. Annie hugged Mikasa's neck with both hands and stretched her right leg forward behind Mikasa's front leg. All the strength of her body exploded and she leaned forward, and Mikasa couldn't help but fall backwards. However, she responded quickly, hugging Annie's waist with both hands again, forcibly twisting half of her body and falling to the ground face to face with Annie. Punch. After the two fell to the ground, Mikasa was pressed against the ground with her arms exerting force to Annie's strength, and one rolled and pressed Annie, but her hands were also pressed against the ground by Annie's back, and her neck was pressed by Annie. It's quiet now, both of them can't stand up. Mikasa was lying on top of Annie, and his arm could not be pulled out by the weight of the two people. Mikasa looked at Annie's delicate face and said, "Let go of me. How long are you going to lie like this?" Annie smiled, "Never mind, you can't hit me if I hold you like this." The two looked at each other, not yielding to each other. Annie lowered her voice and whispered, "Why do you care so much about Eren? Is he just a family member?" Mikasa's expression changed slightly and she said softly, "It has nothing to do with you." Annie. "I don't think boys like violent girls. Me, I wouldn't mind a violent woman." Takashi smiled before being hit by Ymir. The voices of the two were very low, and others in the noisy training ground couldn't hear what they were saying clearly. Takashi just watched the confrontation with stars in his eyes, appreciating the brilliant techniques both girls were displaying. Just as everything was about to get more intense, Instructor Keith approached with other instructors and shouted, "Stop right now, the sparring is over." When everyone heard the words "Den Instructor Keith," they fell silent and slowly moved to the side. The instructors were a little late. Well, it's not like there was a winner, Takashi thought silently. Mina said, "That's all for today, class was dismissed." "Too bad. I liked how things were going. If they had a few more minutes, the winner would have been Mikasa," Jean said with a bright smile. "Stop talking nonsense. If they'd had a few more minutes, Annie would have come out the winner." Marco Bot disagreed with Jean Kirstein's words. "Huh. Are you telling me Annie could have won?" Jean asked, slightly annoyed. Takashi looked at this pair of friends and thought that the next moment they would fight to prove who would be the winner, Mikasa or Annie. However, with Instructor Keith's instruction, this dream duel had ended hastily and neither girl continued to fight. In the end, it was not known who won and who lost. Strangely enough, Eren still learned martial arts from Annie during the hand-to-hand combat training, but Mikasa and Annie did not fight again, as if everything had gone back to the way it was before. Takashi was puzzled. Is this the end? Isn't there something else? Isn't there a tiebreaker after the first season? However, Takashi was one more of those who were left with those doubts in his memory. Days passed, and the weather gradually became cooler. Today, Instructor Keith announced something to everyone. Instructor Keith stood on the high platform and looked at everyone. It is winter and the firewood is running out. In the last 2 days, everyone will go to cut firewood and you must send a special batch to the nearest garrison corps. I don't want any complaints, it won't be worse than training more tired. It's really inspiring. Takashi wiped away a fake tear. Nelson looked at Takashi and smiled. This is the first task we are assigned to support the garrison corps. It is said that this will continue to happen until the training corps is disbanded. You are right, we will possibly start with more important tasks sometime later. Takashi nodded with understanding. The garrison troops were known to be in charge of defending the wall from the Titans. Their main task was to improve the walls and repair them, patrol and maintain order within the walls. However, many were not happy with the idea of chopping firewood for others when they had a goal of being soldiers. Everyone was arguing for a while, but no one objected, not to mention whether the objection was useful or not. As Instructor Keith said, it would be no more strenuous than training. After the assigned task to collect and cut firewood for the garrison army was handed over, all the soldiers of the training corps went to the forest to cut firewood. Bang! 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 There was a large array of axes chopping large and small logs. I can understand that we cut firewood to replenish the base's inventory. Why should we send a batch to the garrison regiment? Connie wiped his sweat and voiced his thoughts. I don't know, they should be able to buy it. Wood isn't expensive anyway. Takashi chopped down a small tree with an axe. Maybe they can save some money to buy wine if they do it this way. This sentence reminded Eren of Uncle Hens the garrison soldier. Before the Titans broke through the wall, he had been drunk all day. How much he hated all this before, but unfortunately he can't see it anymore. Armin tied the cut firewood with and explained. The instructor did not say why, but it's okay. I heard that soldiers in the training corps in the north often do this kind of thing. You don't have to guess, I know what's going on. According to my uncle, who was a garrison soldier, after the Titans broke through Mary's wall, the garrison soldiers at Rose's wall began training to reacquaint themselves with the three-dimensional maneuvering equipment. Some are preparing, they know that sooner or later they will face the Titans and by then they will be ready. Marco said suddenly. Armin understood in an instant, and the training must consume a lot of gas, blades, food and healing medicines, and after the fall of the Wall of Mary, we lost 1/3 of the land and 1/10 of the population, and taxes have also been reduced, so now the funding for the garrison regiment is also scarce. Connie said, it looks like everyone is having a hard time. Sasha suddenly got a little angry. I mean, the forest has been affected and there's no place to hunt. Eren shouted excitedly, I'll kill all the Titans. Everyone knows the situation now, are you still thinking of running away? The scene was silent for a while and no one spoke, so this time Jean didn't stand up to mock Eren. In fact, she hasn't fought with Eren over this kind of thing since the last special training. Of course, other little things are still loud in those two's mouths. The current situation is that, unlike the peaceful life that had been undisturbed by the Titans for over 100 years, the Titans have become an unavoidable problem. Among the more than 200 soldiers in training, most will eventually join the garrison corps, except for the 10 finalists who are eligible to join the military police regiment. Now it seems that the garrisoned corps is not as comfortable as before, reflecting the tense situation everywhere. In October 848 there was a heavy thunderstorm. Under the heavy rain, a group of soldiers from the training corps ran in the dark forest with raincoats over their bodies, a heavy backpack and equipped with their three-dimensional maneuvering equipment. This time there was a race that tested physical strength. Regardless of whether it was a sunny day or there was a thunderstorm, this test should be performed regularly. Instructor Keith rode a horse with a raincoat and kept urging everyone closely. Takashi this time did not run in the middle of the group of soldiers. This time he kept some speed in the front position. Next to him was Mikasa, Eren and surprisingly Nelson. Nelson had been outdoing himself next to Takashi. He could now be among the top 40 to 30 soldiers in the corps. Eren looked back and said, damn, Armin is about to fall behind again. Takashi comforted him, don't worry, he's not that bad, I've never seen him give up since he got here. At the back of the group, Armin gasped deeply and gradually began to fall behind. Run. You're too slow, shouted Instructor Keith. What's the matter with you, Arlert? You're falling behind, is it too heavy? Do you want to be the only one to take off his gear? Instructor Keith spat. If this was a mission, you'd be Titan food by now. Armin startled and ran forward with morale high. When instructor Keith saw this, he led his horse to the front to urge other soldiers forward. Amin feels that his feet are getting heavier and heavier and, although he has been training for more than 2 years, his fitness is not responding to him the way he wants it to. Reiner ran when he saw this and carried Amin's weight on himself. I must say, if Reiner is really more sociable, it would give a very inspiring feeling. Give it to me, you'll slow us all down. This exercise scores for the final grade. Armin was a little surprised. No, Reiner, if you help me, you'll lose points too. Reiner said casually, then don't let him find out. Keith was watching. Do you really think I can't see? However, he waited a moment while he analyzed Armin's next moves. Amin gritted his teeth, reached out and grabbed the heavy backpack, loaded it on his back and ran forward. I don't want to be a burden. Running frantically, Armin's face was sore. He kept running and running, not thinking about anything, running the path forward with heavy steps, and when he didn't know the direction of the time, the training finally ended. The boy named Armin Arlert leaned against a tree, panting heavily. Due to the rain, the melee training was cancelled, so that everyone could rest for a few hours before lunch and then conduct the training with the 3-dimensional maneuvering equipment in the afternoon. This training is also regardless of wind and rain. The Survey Corps generally chooses good weather for expeditions outside the wall, but if they stay outside the wall for a long time, they may encounter any kind of weather, so the training with the 3-dimensional maneuvering equipment must also be carried out under any kind of weather and conditions. In the dining room at noon, Takashi, Thomas and Armin were sitting together. This time it was Eren and Mikasa's turn to perform some extra tasks, so they were present. Armin rested his head on the mass and could barely support himself during the physical training. It was also because it was raining heavily and the road was muddy with mud, which left him completely exhausted. Takashi, are you really so determined to explore outside the walls? Asked Armin suddenly. Takashi, who was struggling with Sasha, who suddenly arrived to steal his bread, was stunned for a moment and said, yes, if you ask me the reason I would tell you that she is not focused on something extraordinary. I grew up in the forest and learned how important it is to hunt. The difficulty all hunters faced after humanity was attacked by the Titans was depressing. At first I was safe and now there is no turning back. I want to create a better future for everyone and follow the next one to continue the fight against the Titans. Armin raised his head and stared at him. Really, is that why you do it? He looked a bit entangled and Armin finally asked, if I join the Survey Corps, will I be of any use? Takashi understands that Armin is really suspicious of his physical abilities now and said, it's just what you think right now. Everyone can be good at something. Think about your strengths and you can find your place in the team. This might be what many soldiers who only know how to kill Titans lack. With a somewhat unsure expression, Armin whispered, but I don't seem to have any strengths or talents. Don't say that. At least your brain is better than ours. It was not his intention to congratulate Armin. He was never that smart a man, so he focused on being observant. If he and Armin were compared, he wouldn't be able to think of many brilliant ideas. Armin feels a little embarrassed. No one had ever praised him before, except for Eren. Before he met Eren and Mikasa, Armin had no friends. Because of his fragility, his thoughts were out of sync with those of his peers. He almost grew up being bullied by all kinds of people until Eren appeared in his life. He appreciates his friends, but doesn't know what else he can do for them in the future. He wants to help Eren, but he doesn't know if he'll be a hindrance in the end. Anyone could say it's a great friendship. Takashi wouldn't dare say he carries that same feeling for other people he had just met. The only person Takashi cared about was inexplicably Sasha. He felt he should take care of her, but he still doubted if they were because of Sasha's dad's words. Armin looked at Takashi and remarked, I'll do my best not to be a hindrance, but I've always been curious. What was it that happened to you to make you think that way? You say you're a hunter, but you're different from Sasha, just like you don't seem to be afraid of Titans either. I can't understand it. Is it because you've never seen a Titan? Takashi was silent for a moment. In his previous world, Earth, he was an ordinary person with the chance given to him by life to be able to win the lottery. As for his experience once he left school, there was not much to say. He lived normally, pursuing his goals, led his family life and took care of his parents. Later, when those thieves broke into her house to steal, it was unexpected, but he defended and gave her life for her family. Now it could be said that she was a lonely person between her passing self and what she is now. Laughing casually, Takashi spread his hands and said, I don't think so. I want to do something meaningful in this life, and if I can become a soldier, I will do it with all my heart in it. What do you think about that? Therefore, he was silent for a while and said, it is good and admirable that you have a vision about the future, honorable and suitable for our world. By the way, Mikasa should have told you already. Your surname is the same as hers. You could have a closer relationship with her family. Takashi shook his head. He didn't necessarily have a family relationship with Mikasa in this world. What if he unexpectedly is Mikasa's cousin and a certain captain of the Exploration Corps and his uncle? Mikasa actually didn't like Takashi at all, thinking about how he filled Eren's head with many frustrating things. At this, Takashi felt a bit of a headache and remarked, maybe, who knows? He doesn't remember the rest of the story and knew nothing about the Ackermans besides that they were strong and invincible in battle, and the previous Takashi's father didn't mention anything significant in the forest life. Even his last name might be false. So far all he can remember is his life as a child in the forest, shortly after a conversation with his father before his father entered the forest and disappeared. He vaguely remembered that his father's name was Cordell Ackerman. He was not a soldier and lived normally until his wife died and he decided to go into the woods to become a hunter. However, it was all very confusing and Takashi always felt a pounding headache when he tried to remember anything more than that. Takashi's father once said, "There will always be people who want to hurt you. Others will need you to protect them. Live your life protecting those you love and keeping away those you don't want in your life." Oh, it's like that. Armin didn't ask any more questions. Although the relationship wasn't good, at least Takashi didn't fight with Mikasa. He took a deep breath and shouted loudly, "I've decided. I'm going to the Exploration Corps, for no reason. I just want to go there because my friends are there. I want to see the sea, but I also want to protect and support my comrades." Armin has made his decision and intends to find an opportunity to tell Eren and Mikasa about it. Takashi nodded. Even without him in this world, Armin would naturally go to the Exploration Corps and this outcome has nothing to do with him. However, Mikasa didn't want this outcome. She hadn't given up her dream of letting Eren live a normal life together with her. Even so, just as she diverted Armin's attention, Armin made up his mind to go to the Exploration Corps. Mikasa was tired. Takashi just felt that this had nothing to do with him. Without him, Eren, Armin and Mikasa would have to continue to fight for their freedom. In the dorm at night, Thomas in the top bunk couldn't help but complain, "Takashi, when do you think a day is going to be bad?" Today it was raining all day, and as a result there was only physical training and practice with the three-dimensional maneuvering equipment. Thomas felt that at this rate the future was not bright. Takashi, who was manipulating his chakra, said, "Future military soldier, we graduate in a little over a year." Thomas, who was lying on the bed, thought about his life ahead. "Training is so exhausting and I feel like I'm on the verge of collapse. Today I almost passed out on the morning run, and almost hit a tree in the afternoon. Don't complain. Those who still stay are very tenacious and lucky. Don't forget that we are only 241 people in this base," Takashi said with a slight smile. "Well, I hope we can all graduate smoothly," Thomas muttered silently. Time passed very quickly, and a heavy snowfall fell silently. This morning, when Takashi opened the bedroom door, all he saw were the snowflakes falling from the sky and the largely frozen ground. It was now December 848, and soon to be 849, and he has spent more than half the time in peace. Today being a rare day of rest at the end of each month, Takashi got up early and carried a bucket of well-prepared feed to feed the horse he called Babas. Although there were riding training sessions, they were not as frequent as before. Catching a snowflake in his hands and exhaling a white breath, Takashi walked to the stable unhurriedly. The lines of footprints on the ground showed that someone had already gone to feed the horses. Feeding the horses, chopping firewood, traveling to another world. The interesting thing is that he has done all that, but he still can't be sure to face the evil of this world and be able to survive. When he arrived at the stable, he found his horse. After seeing Takashi's arrival, Babas snorted and turned his head away from his food. Touching the horse's head, Takashi knew that Babas was a bit angry and there was nothing he could do. He had not fed him well recently and there was no fresh fodder at this time due to the cold weather. After touching Babas' mane for a while, he found that he didn't want to eat. Takashi was a bit helpless, his horse was a bit stubborn. Sasha next door was also feeding her horse. After seeing Takashi's situation, she couldn't help but laugh. "Your horse is very temperamental." Takashi turned to look at Sasha not far to the right. "I can't help it. This time the fresh grass is over. It's already winter after all." "Yes, it's already winter." Sasha paused and muttered, "I don't know if my father can hunt enough prey this time. No, possibly we won't do that anymore." Sasha reacted somewhat disappointed. The members of her clan were willing to give up their way of living life as the ancestors did. Her father even gave up his way of life to adapt to the situation in the world. "Since you're so worried about your family, why don't you go back this time and take a look around? You don't seem to have been home since we got here." Takashi reminded her. Unlike him, who had no place to return to, Sasha still had a home to return to. Sasha was silent for a while, her expression somewhat nervous. No. No, my father said it was necessary. I haven't learned to make friends and be someone different. Takashi smiled. He thought about the days he hunted with Sasha around the base. She was happy every time he hunted in the forest, but unfortunately the arrows had been damaged and lately there was no time. At this, he couldn't help but ask directly, aren't Connie and I your friends? Don't you get along with the witch Ymir and Krista? Mikasa, Mina and the others are your friends too. Sasha was very moved. Thank you, I only regret it, I shouldn't have fought with my father. Tisk. That's really touching. Takashi, when did you become such a gentleman? Look how excited Sasha is. A sarcastic exclamation was heard and there was no telling when Ymir and Krista came with horse feed. The only woman who could say that without embarrassment was the witch Ymir. Takashi couldn't help but roll his eyes. Looks like you and Krista developed an annoying ability to appear behind people without making a sound. Because Ymir and Krista were also on the hunting team during that time, Sasha, Ymir and Krista were already quite familiar with them. Of course, even acquaintances don't expect to hear anything good from Ymir's mouth. Takashi, who knew a lot more about Ymir, didn't fare any better than the others. How could Ymir honestly shut up? Be honest, you want to be Sasha's boyfriend. Sasha suddenly blushed. It's not like that, we don't. Takashi was speechless. Ymir, do you think I'm talking to a woman just to make her my girlfriend? Ymir snorted coldly. Then why does my Krista talk about you every day and take you as a role model? Isn't it because you said something strange to her? Krista was about to answer but was rebuked by Ymir's hand quickly. How? What happened? Takashi was a little confused. That shouldn't have happened. He was sure he never said anything special to Krista, let alone flirting with her. Not even with someone in his previous life did he flirt. After laughing for a while, he continued to be a noble bachelor. Sasha realized she was being mistaken for someone a little more than Takashi's friend and stepped back with an embarrassed but polite smile. Takashi felt he should alleviate her aggravation and shouted, it's all nonsense. I really didn't say anything out of line to Krista. You neurotic witch, it's slander from you in your stinking mouth. Krista is gentle, cute and helpful. There are many more male soldiers who want to be with her than Mikasa and Annie. After all, the latter two are at least hard to get along with because of their coldness. And Krista seems to be easy to fool. Someone easy to get along with being, but no one succeeds in getting anything, because they can't get past the witch Ymir. It is not known how many children who tried to conquer Krista were molded by Ymir. By the way, many doubted if it was really worth it. All those who tried to get close to Krista said, is it so hard to get close to Krista? And now that witch Ymir is bothering him. If he really did something like this, it's okay and he accepts it. The problem is that Takashi didn't do anything but training, so he couldn't help but complain. Ymir wanted to keep talking to Krista, but finally broke free from her arm and said, Ymir, it's not what you think, I'm just. When he was trying to explain, he suddenly didn't know how to do it. Krista remembered the day Takashi looked at her reading a book of a story about a knight. She asked him curiously, Takashi, do you like this book? Takashi, who had seen that book before, shook his head and said, I don't like the ending, I think everything would be better. Takashi compared the story about one he had seen in his previous world, slowly narrated it to Krista and then told her about how the knight married 3 princesses. How can he marry 3 women? Krista blushed, her big blue eyes were full of surprise. And why not? He's strong, brave and helped the kingdom out of a major crisis. Takashi asked disapprovingly. Krista's expression was a little surprised. Looking at Takashi's serious face, she barely calmed down, but, this isn't romantic at all. Takashi chuckled and said, a certain man said, where one person fits there will be room for another later on. Krista couldn't help but think that there was an apparent possibility. She couldn't imagine what life would be like with 3 women loving the same man. Only then Takashi realized that the gentle and kind girl in front of him was really uncomfortable. These complicated things, it can happen if everyone agrees, but it's very unlikely. Krista lowered her head and muttered, can it happen in real life? Turning back to the stable, Takashi more or less understood what was going on. So that was why. Takashi pointed at Krista. Hearing that, Krista didn't know how to explain the situation and after a while she calmed down. Ymir reached out and fixed Krista's bangs. Okay, don't pay attention to those boring guys in the future, especially Takashi, it's not a good thing. Huh. Takashi said, Ymir, it's okay for this time. But if you're so unreasonable in the future, I'll have to teach you a lesson on the battlefield. Ymir snorted coldly, a guy without any grace and respect for women. Krista smiled apologetically at Takashi. However, before she could say anything to alleviate this embarrassing situation, Ymir grabbed Krista's hand and pulled her away from the stable. Sasha, take care of your boyfriend and keep him polite. Ymir left a few last words before leaving the place. I can't do that. Sasha was at a loss as to what to do. If Takashi were someone else, Ymir wouldn't talk so much, she'd just curse him before tuning him out. But on the one hand, she is familiar with Takashi and they have a much closer relationship than with anyone else besides Krista. She likes to tease him and all those little things stay in the past the next day. At that time, Babas was no longer mad at Takashi for his food and Takashi continued to feed the other horses a little depressed. Takashi, Sasha hesitated for a moment. Don't feel uncomfortable about Ymir's words. Takashi smiled slightly and patted Sasha. However, Sasha was reddening and said, goodbye. Sasha ran out of the stable without another word, leaving a much more confused Takashi than he already was. Today was really an unlucky day and he couldn't be angry even after being scolded by Ymir. Goodbye, Sasha. Takashi raised his hand to say goodbye. Thought of her enthusiastic friend who suddenly acted strangely. Only now did he realize that this world was full of weirdos. In other words, there don't seem to be many normal girls here, do there? Takashi's idea is correct. There aren't many normal people who actually play a role in the female characters like other stories. Mina is relatively normal, but she seems to get along with everyone in general. The witch Ymir is a titan, Sasha loves food, Annie is cold, well no big deal and Mikasa just has a wren in her eyes. Not to mention the abnormal girls. In the blink of an eye the month of February 849 had arrived. On the high wooden platform in front of the general training camp, Instructor Keith stared at the 240 soldiers below the stage, cleared his throat and announced, so, as planned you will be divided into special squads. In the previous training, you were divided into several groups of different sizes, but this time the division is different, because most of the time you will be training in your squad until graduation. Instructor Keith paused and looked at the orderly group of people and then said, a squad usually consists of 5 to 6 people. This time you will be divided into more than 40 classes. Only the top 30 in the usual training scores are eligible to serve as squad leaders, so at first, you will not be able to choose the most outstanding people in the corps. People must be in the same squadron and the purpose of the division is not only to train the team, but also so that the instructors can evaluate the entire squadron and they progress together. You now have only one day to find a squad. The people who will be suitable to be leaders will be announced on the notice board. Once you have completed your squadron, they will come to me to register. Squads that are not ordered will not be accepted. Training in this test is of great importance, as are the methods of distributing exploration corps squads. All usually deal with titans in groups of 2 to 3 and at most 6 people. This is usually the ideal way of fighting at the front. 1 or 2 people draw attention to themselves in front of the titan. The strongest person in the group attacks the titan's neck from the side or from behind. A squad can be divided into 2 groups, and tactics are flexible and diverse during training. From the training corps, the combat effectiveness and the naturalness of fighting in a group is usually increased. If in the scouting or garrison corps a recruit faces a titan together with his squad, then the results will be better. As for the military police regiment, there is nothing. The longer you are in that place, the more useless you become. Although the best soldiers in the training corps are usually there, their peak period is diminished by inactivity with the 3-dimensional maneuver team. Seeing Instructor Keith turn around and leave, the soldiers in the audience suddenly started talking, and some people even started pulling people. There are no more 50 groups, and only a few can be squad leaders. Those who know of their abilities are already pulling people in. Mikasa looked at Aran. Aran, join me. No need, Mikasa, I already invited Armin, so you can invite someone else too. Aran interrupted Mikasa and grabbed Armin to entice someone else. Mikasa was a bit stunned when she saw Aran's figure leaving. Captain Takashi, Nelson has decided to join us, Thomas said to Takashi. Captain, I'll work hard. Nelson smiled, slightly embarrassed. Takashi nodded and said, we are 2 to 3 more people short in our group. He usually has one of the best training results. In fact, there are still many people who want to join his class, but Takashi is not very familiar with them. He wants to find some close people, but all of them might be leaders of their respective groups. When he tried to invite Sasha to his group, she told her that already joined Aren's group together with Armin in a strange way. Takashi forgot about the fact that Aren was almost annihilated in the Battle of Trost. Otherwise he would definitely prevent Sasha from getting hurt. The protagonist of this world is simply not trustworthy. Just as Takashi was thinking of gathering some people to do the count, Krista ran up. Takashi, can I join your group? The pretty blue eyes looked at Takashi hopefully. After a slight daze, Takashi replied, Krista, don't you want to organize a group yourself? Krista usually has good training results, she can be in the top 20. Don't look at people's delicate appearance as a general result, she is not a weak person. No, I don't know how to lead others. Krista's sweet voice sounded. Then, you're welcome. After thinking for a moment, Takashi didn't refuse, looking at Ymir who stood silently to the side, wondering why he didn't prompt her to stop, but this result is good if they want to support each other in the future. Ymir's strength is very good, which is well understood by the male soldiers she faced when they tried to conquer Krista, and her performance in theory class is also very good, she could easily be in the top 15. Apparently aware of the doubt in Takashi's eyes, Ymir chuckled. Don't be surprised, I thought you would look for me first to join your group. You're right. I was about to look for you because of that. Doubting if their group was balanced, Takashi invited a sixth member and that was the fearful Daz to their group. With a disapproving snort, Ymir asked, even if Krista and I leave, wouldn't there be 12 people more unfortunate than without us? I don't want to be the squad leader. Takashi spread his hands and decided to give it a try. It's okay, I have no problem. Let's go to Instructor Keith to register, I hope we can pass. Don't worry, with the dead weight that is Daz it will be more than enough to balance the scales, Ymir said with a cold expression. I'll try to get better, Daz said with a shaky voice. With this Takashi's group had been completed with the maximum number of participants, Nelson, Thomas, Ymir, Krista, Daz and Takashi. Will the bald Keith be satisfied? If not, he might try to draw Thomas away, he definitely needed Ymir on his side to keep an eye on her. Thus, the 6 people walked straight to Instructor Keith's office. At this point, most of the people had not been divided into classes and their group was relatively the fastest to arrive. After waiting for a while, a group of people who arrived before Takashi and the others were dismissed and then Keith called the 6 into the office. Instructor Keith sat behind his desk. Seeing Takashi, Ymir, Krista, Nelson, Thomas and Daz coming in, he frowned slightly. Between the 6 people, even Thomas and Nelson had around 70 and 80 points in the most recent training. Nelson was originally at a very low level along with Daz who was one of the last to arrive at the camp in the snow test. However, Nelson changed a lot in this last year due to the training he had with Takashi for a while, which increased all of his stats. Instructor Keith's face showed no anger. Wasn't I clear that, in principle, so many elites are not allowed in one group? Before Takashi could explain, Ymir said, I'm not used to leading others, so naturally I have to choose a guy who is stronger than me and hardly somewhat reliable. Takashi heard that he did not move from behind, and his heart was dark. Even if she could allow Ymir's comments, this Titan witch doesn't reserve herself before anyone to blurt out hurtful remarks. It's a pity, I'll forgive her this time due to the fact that I trust me. Instructor Keith neither agreed nor refuted Ymir, but looked at Krista instead and asked, and you? Krista Lenz. Krista was stunned for a moment. She hadn't expected Instructor Keith to ask her a question. She hesitated for a moment and said, I think I still have many deficiencies. I hope to learn from Takashi. After a while of silence, Instructor Keith said to Takashi, Takashi Ackerman, give me a reason why I should let this group pass. Without hesitation, Takashi said bluntly, I trust that I will not disappoint my teammates and I will be a good leader for them. Both the weaker ones as well as the stronger ones will outperform them and at the end of the day, you won't notice who is the squad leader of this group. Instructor Keith suddenly smiled, you are lucky. The youngsters are quite arrogant, not to mention the best youngsters, there is no team similar to yours. Keith took the pen and began to fill out the form without complaint. First to arrive with several strong recruits, first to be accepted, you are the 7th group. Yes. Nelson shouted with excitement. We're lucky. Thomas also smiled in relief. Turning his head, he looked at Krista, Ymir, Nelson, Daz and Thomas, and couldn't help but laugh. 7th group, go ahead. Yes, squad leader. They all replied. Instructor Keith watched the 6 people from Takashi's class leave. In fact, Takashi was one of the recruits he admired the most. He was anxious about his future. It is true that Takashi sometimes told his friends that he was not good at everything. However, that guy is indeed a natural warrior to lead and make others overcome. He didn't know if Takashi was born with that ability or had been trained before coming to this place. Keith thought to himself that Iran had twice as many goals as ordinary people. Takashi on his side had a will to fight stronger than anyone else. The time is gradually approaching the end of March, which is the season when spring flowers bloom and all things grow. After the training corps was divided into special squads, team training began. Usually, squad training is one day and the other based on general training is another day. Of course, the so-called general training is usually physical training, riding, hand-to-hand combat and theoretical classes are still together with the training corps. Squads are just to enhance team participation with the three-dimensional maneuver team. Today the day was nice, the sky was clear and the sun was shining slightly. In the afternoon, everyone was training in their squadrons with the three-dimensional maneuver team and the task was to cut wooden titans. Krista. The body's center of gravity when using the equipment is mainly at the waist and soles of the feet. Pay attention to the cutting angle when attacking the titan. If you have less strength than required, you should try to make use of your body's inertia as much as possible, or use your own gravity to swing the swords diagonally when descending. Thomas. Don't cut with brute force alone. The sharpness of the blade makes it easier to use. Remember to adjust the cutting angle and stabilize your body when attacking. Nelson. You must pay attention to your surroundings and always have an anchor point for the next hook. Don't increase your speed before you find a landing point to keep moving. Ymir. I've reminded you many times, don't hold down the mage trigger of your swords for too long. I know your speed increases exponentially, but the gas also increases your rate of depletion and that's not suitable during a battle. Daz. Focus on mobilizing better in the hood, don't try to attack if you are not sure of making a correct cut. You always doubt your attack, you're afraid to move faster and I don't think that's enough to improve in the other aspects. Takashi watched his teammates training closely and pointed out the problems of all of them. Understood, squad leader. Krista replied warmly. Thomas looked at the worn blade in his hands, a little embarrassed. Takashi, I'll pay attention next time. Understood. Nelson listened carefully to all his mistakes. He had been learning from Takashi for a long time, so he knew how important it was to listen to him. I understand. Your big sister listened carefully. Ymir naturally replied in a bold voice. Seeing everyone who had descended to the ground, Takashi nodded. Okay, let me demonstrate. He pulled the trigger. The hook attached to a branch and the compressed gas was expelled, causing the retractable rope to snap back towards the team. Whoosh. Takashi's body quickly flew over a titan target made of wood. The neck of this titan is made of a material that simulates the muscles of a titan. Cut. Following the inertia of his body's movement, Takashi cut the titan target's neck with his swords. The incisions are perfect in both angle and depth, ensuring an immediate casualty. Then, the hook that had retracted to the team came out again and by aiming his waist, Takashi maneuvered his speed making minute use of his compressed gas to land quickly. It feels the same every time, I feel like I'm flying next to the clouds. Takashi sighed a little as he felt the earth once again on his feet. Our squadron leader is amazing. Admired Krista lightly. Takashi looked at Krista silently. He had told her that she didn't need to call him squad leader all the time. It was kind of embarrassing. However, Krista and with help from Nelson disagreed. Well, you do have some superior skills. Ymir was annoyed when she heard Krista's words and habitually attacked Takashi with venomous words. Nelson became a little serious and announced a message to Takashi. Squad leader, just now, an instructor came and said to meet you in the courtyard after our practice. Shall we go now? Looking at the glare of the sun, Takashi felt that the time was almost over and said, let's see what Instructor Keith has to say, I hope and it's not bad news. Ymir said indifferently, no matter what he has to say, I've learned all that was to be learned in this place. Krista blinked, come on, it's no good being late. If we were late, Instructor Keith would possibly punish us. Daz spoke in a fearful voice. I'm sure of it. Thomas nodded. Takashi then led his squad into the courtyard and then looked at the bald instructor on the high platform. After waiting a while longer, Instructor Keith moistened his throat when he saw that everyone had arrived. Cough. Let me announce something. In May, during the exercise training in the Trost district, the largest garrison corps command, Commander Pixis, will come to inspect your development. So, give a good demonstration of what you are capable of. This training will not only factor into the final score, but will also have a bright future for each of you if the commander takes notice of you. After Instructor Keith finished speaking, he turned and walked away, leaving behind a group of soldiers from the training who were talking about it. Only the top 10 of the entire corps in the final score are eligible to enter the military police corps and very few people dared to go to the scouting corps, so most would be inside the garrison troops, and it would be very useful if they are valued by Commander Pixis and more importantly if that exercise will be included in the final evaluation. In addition, The Garrison Corps commander also has the qualifications to recommend outstanding garrison soldiers to join the Gendarmerie Regiment, which is also a way to join the military police regiment. I have to do well. If you behave well and are appreciated, it's no worse than going to the Gendarmerie. I haven't been to the Trost district yet. I want to see what that town is like. Everyone was very excited, but someone in specific was grimacing with irritability. He was from the Trost region. He'll go back home, but he's not happy. Go to hell with the Titans, I must join the Gendarmerie, Jean growled inwardly. Takashi was a little surprised. He still had an impression of Commander Pixis. In the original story, he decisively used Eren's Titan power to launch the reconquest battle to the Trost district. But Takashi didn't think much of that. He's just a trainee who hasn't graduated yet and can't say anything at the moment to help in the future. The training went on in an orderly manner, and the time gradually came to the day. Early in the morning on May 1st, everyone loaded their luggage and began to follow Instructor Keith to the Trost district. Raising his hand to block the sunlight over his head, Eren looked off into the distance, and Rose's wall was already in sight. He couldn't help but remember his hometown, Shiganshina district. What's wrong, don't you feel well? Mikasa asked worriedly, looking at Eren, who was a bit depressed. It's okay, I just remembered our hometown. Eren shook his head and didn't say much. He would definitely go back to his hometown, no matter how many obstacles came his way. Takashi also looked off into the distance at the Great Wall at least 50 meters high across the horizon, as along the magnificent wall stretched to the end of sight, and evidently as a human from another world there was a trace of surprise. A monstrosity of a wall so thick that it could not be easily breached by Titans. However, with the level of architecture and technology that went into creating such a huge wall, it would be impossible to make it so high. So how was it created? A great miracle for people who only believe in science. Shaking his head, Takashi didn't think much about it. If he hadn't known the name of the world he was sent to, he would have wondered if he had arrived in the world of Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings among others. However, here there were no dragons or magic, here there were Titans. It was already 9 a.m. when Takashi and the others walked through the gate and into the city of the Trist district that lies south of the Rose Wall. This exercise simulates the situation where the Titans go through the Trost district. The training soldiers are randomly divided into 3 teams and the exercise is divided into 2 parts. One part of the training soldiers assists in the evacuation of civilians and the other part directly attacks the Titans, and each squad has its own zone. Jean Kirkstein looked at the familiar streets, but the familiar landscape was anything but happy. Many people in the training corps came from the Trost district, like Thomas Wagner. Jean's home is also here, but he hates being here, knowing that the days ahead will become annoying. Although the Trost district is a city, it is considered small. When you look up, you can see the high city wall, which makes you feel like a bird in a cage. Thomas Wagner expressed his feelings. The depression of adolescence, the generation gap with his parents, and the fantasy of an ideal girl make him feel like a bird in a cage. So he escaped from here to train the corps and vowed to go to the inner city to become a military policeman. Then he met Takashi and Eren, 2 guys who were the complete opposite of his ideals. Takashi taught him many things and they eventually became friends. Takashi was better than him in almost every training, although his tongue was a bit annoying. As for Eren, Eren's perception is very complicated, making him jealous that Eren could have a childhood love like Mikasa, expressing his hatred towards the Titans and his will to kill them all. He admitted traces of his fears in Eren's determination, for which he admires those thoughts. Now Thomas knew he was stronger. He trusted his teammates as his teammates trusted him. Takashi showed him his skills and strengths, how amazing he could be in training and the great improvements he could make in a short time. Doesn't he long for the outside world? Didn't he know about the Titan threat? He knows all this. He knows that someone needs to fight and someone else to follow that fight, and he also knows how dangerous it is to fight with Titans. The rational side tells him to go to a safe place, but there is a side that is pushing him to become a soldier of the Exploration Corps. A group of people walked through the streets of Trost, and Sasha next to them said excitedly, "There are so many delicious foods here." Connie looked around. He and Sasha grew up in the villages inside Rose's wall just like Takashi, so they hadn't been in the city much. At this point, they were also a little happy. "It's my first time coming to the city on the wall, it feels good." Jean reluctantly smiled. "When you join the garrison, you can stay here forever. In the future, I will become a military policeman and come to see you, ha 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 ha." Sasha and Connie were a little unhappy, but said nothing, which sometimes made it unpleasant for Jean, but they have been together for 2 years and are a little used to Jean's thoughts. Armin next door asked, "Jean's house is here too. Why don't you come back and take a look?" Marco said with a smile, "Yes, there is still some time. The exercise starts at 11 o'clock and Thomas has already gone home. Connie continued, your mother would be very happy to see you. In her rebellious time, Jean fought a lot with her mother. Marco said with a light smile. The group was a bit stunned and understood Jean's strange behavior, who was a bit upset on the way here. By the way, where is Takashi? Connie asked lightly. Sasha showed a strange look and said, well, he went somewhere else with his friend. Is your relationship with Takashi normal? Did you two fight by any chance? Armin asked softly. No, not at all, Sasha said somewhat nervously. Takashi and Sasha hadn't been that close to each other for a while now, which was kind of strange. As for Takashi, he already went to Thomas's house for lunch. Sound metallic. At 12 o'clock in the morning, the drill exercise officially began in the Trost district. All soldiers in the training corps had already been briefed on the procedure, as they were also aware of their roles in this test. As announced, the civilians who participated in this drill were all in the majority. The civilians quickly ran to the streets towards the city gate leading to the Maria Wall. Some soldiers directed all the civilians to specially marked streets to protect them from Titan attacks. These streets were marked to maintain a safe evacuation line so that everything would not turn into chaos. Meanwhile, some of the soldiers of the training corps in conjunction with the garrison corps maintained order. This is just a simulation of evacuation in case the Titans burst into the Trost district. The people who approached the gate leading to the Rose Wall felt like a tide. Many people complained about this drill as they ran and felt that the garrison corps was expending unnecessary energy. Of course, none of these people except for Takashi knew that a year later, this place would be infested by Titans. While some were keeping order on the ground, others were using the three-dimensional maneuvering team to slip over the houses and run towards Titan targets made of wood. Jean, wait, that's not our direction. Our mission is to kill the giant that slithered down the left side. Armin ran forward and yelled. How can a soldier not kill a Titan when he sees one? Jean hesitated. Do you want to get more points? Annie asked casually. This exercise, she and Armin still at a distinct disadvantage with other teams. Jean didn't answer and flew towards a Titan target while operating the three-dimensional maneuvering equipment. On a part of the wall in the Trost district, a female garrison corps soldier named Rita Lean saw with a telescope that Jean's Squadron 21 had left the mission site. She deftly retracted her telescope and said to Commander Pixis, who was standing and yawning, Commander, the 21st Training Corps Squadron has left its assigned mission site. Pixis, who was a bit distracted, woke up and looked at Rita. What time is dinner? With a helpless expression, Rita said, Commander, we just had lunch and some training team soldiers left the mission site to earn points. The commander smiled and didn't mind. It's normal for young people to be a little energetic. It's okay. It's good to be motivated and kill a Titan when they see one. On the streets of the Trost district, some soldiers of the training corps made use of their three-dimensional maneuvering equipment to accelerate their movement along the rooftops at high speed. Whoosh. Jean ran fast, but there was someone faster than Jean. Mikasa flew over the Titan target and with a spinning blow sliced the back of the Titan's wooden target. Slightly stunned, Jean immediately smiled. Indeed, only you can outrun me. Don't worry about that Takashi guy, he's on the other side anyway. Jean found another Titan target, but was snatched away by Connie and Sasha following him. This time he was so angry that he wanted to hit someone. On the other side of the city, Takashi's team was moving deftly through the structures of the houses. The formation he carried was just like the tip of an arrow, Takashi leading and the others on the sides. Daz, Thomas. Takashi shouted and ordered, distract the Titan as we have practiced so far. Ymir and Krista moved to the right side next to me. Yes, Captain. They all moved and in their eyes there was only seriousness. Takashi had advised them to treat this simulation as something as real as possible. Concentrating his mind, Takashi moved quickly down the Titan and cut the sinews of the Titan's feet with his blades. These Titans were precision-made and there were several targets to attack from. Many of the inexperienced soldiers only attacked the back of the head with haste. However, Takashi knew that teamwork was more than necessary to get everyone to survive regardless of Titan casualties. In his opinion, it was better to increase the team's prowess than to rush alone straight into the Titan. He had to first consider the survival of his squad before making a decision, only then could they improve as a whole. Now Nelson, shouted Takashi loudly. Yes, whoosh. Nelson increased his speed and positioned himself at the back of the Titan's head and in an instant made a clean cut. After taking out the Titan, everyone naturally fell back into formation and continued on their way to their final target. Nelson, now it's your turn to lead the squad, Takashi said as they headed to the next target of their mission. Let's move faster. We need to consider our compressed gas and make it quick before we head back to base. With the orders given, Takashi exponentially increased their speed towards the target. Thomas, we'll take care of the diversion and the rest subdue the Titan. Daz, keep an eye out for more Titans nearby. Nelson moved next to Thomas for the Titan's distraction. While Daz watched from a more secluded angle, Ymir and Krista cut one after another of the Titan's sinews. Takashi, who flew into the sky, swiftly descended and cut the Titan's neck without hesitation. In the distance, a soldier in the role of assessment who was in charge of guarding Takashi's team was pleasantly surprised with the prowess of that squadron. Unbelievable. The participation of that team as a whole is as if they are experienced. Not only do they move as a team and do everything necessary to eliminate a Titan, but they also change and keep moving without the need for their captain to command. Which squad did you get to evaluate? Asked another Garrison Corps soldier. It's Squad 7, a real surprise, replied the instructor with surprise. To tell the truth, very few were taking this evaluation with wooden Titans seriously. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, after the first day's exercise, Jean shouted angrily, "You're so despicable, you thieves." Originally familiar with the terrain, he found many wooden Titan targets, but the boys behind him always followed close behind and stole all the Titans from him. Sitting on the ground, Sasha, who was eating potatoes, looked at Jean dissatisfied. Despicable. Jean, are you so naive? Isn't it the prey of the one who grabs it first? With a nasty snort, Jean said angrily, "Sweet potato girl, don't tell me about the fallacies of your hunting tribe." Sasha stood up angrily, "You bring it up again, damn it," everyone almost forgot. Connie, who was sitting off to the side, wasn't satisfied with causing trouble for no reason either. "That's right, apologize. You're not at all well today, do you miss your mother?" Clenching her teeth and throwing out a fist, Sasha immediately raised her leg to launch a counterattack. However, just as the fight was about to break out, Reiner stopped them both. "Damn sweet potato girl, I'll kill all the Titans in tomorrow's test. If you lose because of that, don't come and bother me." Sasha wanted to say something else, when Commander Pixis came out of nowhere. What a dynamic young man. "Commander." The soldiers of the training corps saluted in unison. Commander Pixis said, "It's a little outrageous to compete with each other in practice training. Let's compare each other's cooking skills. Tonight's dinner at 11 o'clock. A cooking showdown. I will be the judge." "This, with all due respect, Commander, we are soldiers not chefs." Jean was overwhelmed. Sasha pointed a piece of potato at Jean. "Are you that afraid of losing even in the kitchen?" "Damn it. I'll beat you, whether it's sweeping the floor or cooking." Jean roared angrily. Major Pixis looked a little excited and said, "That's it, cooking showdown. Create your best cooking in the army." The soldiers also cheered and got excited. This duel is also quite interesting. Two of Pixis' subordinates, Rita and Gustav, looked at each other and felt a little helpless. The commander was too stubborn and did inexplicable things. When Takashi, on the other side, approached, what he looked at was the scene where everyone was shouting Sasha's name. Takashi was stunned. What's the situation? This script is wrong. Could this be due to the influence of alcohol? Eren and Mikasa, who were on duty to carry today's miscellaneous items, were carrying a box and looked blankly at the training corps entertainers. Eren asked, "What happened?" Mikasa answered blankly, "I don't know." Takashi didn't pay much attention to the so-called kitchen showdown, but instead used the afternoon to fly over the city wall of the Trost district with his three-dimensional maneuvering equipment to observe the general terrain along with the buildings. The Trost district is the closest breach towards the Maria Wall, so it was attacked by the Titans much more frequently and was the most important point where humanity had to resist any kind of attack. 5 years after the fall of the Maria Wall, the colossal Titan makes an appearance again, attacking Eren and the other graduates, breaking the cannons above for defense and breaking the outer gate, causing the city to be overrun by the Titans. How does the colossal Titan appear? Takashi couldn't identify a correct answer. If this is a story where the protagonist has his enemies closer than it seems, it could be anyone, the colossal Titan. Are they here? Takashi stopped at the top of the wall and looked at the gate to the south of the Trost district. Isn't it better to attack now? What are they waiting for? Takashi's eyes glowed scarlet red, his Mangekyo Sharingan glowing with anticipation. Commander Pixis and two of his subordinates also took a walk along the city wall. After a bit of wind, the commander was much more awake, but he had no intention of withdrawing the kitchen duel order. It was just a trivial matter. Huh. Who's the young man standing in front? Pixis asked his escorts about Takashi, who was wearing the uniform of the training corps. Gustav looked at Takashi, who was looking concentrated at the buildings below the city not far away. Commander, This is the training corps soldier named Takashi Ackerman. His qualifications are among the best the recruit troops of Cycle 104. Keith and many other instructors speak highly of his skills. Oh, is he? Shall we go ask him what he's doing? Commander Pixis was interested. As Pixis approached from a distance, Takashi noticed, and after seeing the commander approach, he clenched his fists and saluted, "Commander Pixis." Pixis nodded and casually asked, "Recruit, what are you doing here? Are you looking at the scenery?" Hearing Commander Pixis' words, Takashi deactivated his Mangekyo Sharingan and said in a calm voice, "I'm observing the terrain." The commander smiled. Why observing the terrain? After saying that, he waited attentively for this cadet's answer. He had heard about the outstanding Takashi Ackerman. He heard from a certain instructor some very interesting words about the Titans and their abnormality. Commander Pixis had heard from the instructor that these Titans that attacked the Shiganshina wall might be more intelligent and should be classified in a different place. Therefore, his curiosity increased when he saw the author of those words. "I'm just thinking, Commander, if the city gate falls, how to defend it or take it back," Takashi said without taking his gaze from a distance. Looking at Takashi, Pixis didn't ask how to defend the Trost district or how to take it back. "Do you think the colossal titan and the battleship will attack the Trost region?" "Yes," Takashi said directly. "Why? There are titans everywhere in the Mary Wall. It seems they can attack anywhere, right?" Of course, Takashi can't directly say that he knows that in a year the Trost district will be infested with titans. He just said words using his intelligence and double meaning. "This place is the most convenient, quickest and most likely." "Tell me why." Commander Pixis walked to Takashi's side and looked in the direction of the door leading to the now Titan's territory. "I've been thinking about it for a long time, ever since I joined the training corps 2 years ago," Takashi said. "Looking at our map, there is a very clear line from Shiganshina to the Maria Wall that extends all the way to the Trost district and goes straight to that gate. That is the shortest line and where quite possibly another attack will be carried sooner or later. Those titans could be roaming nearby and it's only a matter of the Trost district gate being knocked down for humanity to lose this city." Commander Pixis smiled and said, "Many people have mentioned their opinion, so this is the reason for this exercise, but now it seems that humans can only passively defend themselves. We can't always send a large number of people to constantly watch the movements of the titans. There are many intelligent people in this world, and Takashi also knows that his ideas are quite possibly nothing new and now do not have much meaning for the future. After all, it has been many years since the wall fell and many people should have thought about it. Surely they should have sent out missions to hunt down those titans, right?" Takashi more or less understood the situation and pointed out, "But it's funny, where are those titans? Did the earth eat them?" I've certainly wondered that too. Where did they go and where are they?" Pixis drank some alcohol and said, "Many people believe they have disappeared and more believe they are waiting for the ideal moment to attack again. That colossal titan, how tall is it and how is it possible that it hasn't been found or seen in all these years?" After saying that, Takashi pointed out, "We have to consider the time and important events that happen before humanity is attacked again. They might give us some clues. Everything is limited, it seems there's not much to do, just wait for us to get hit once again in the face," Pixis said with a smile. After thinking for a moment, Takashi pointed out, "But at least we can do something that would help us be more prepared." "What?" the commander asked with a smile. He wasn't really curious, just bored. Pointing to the open space in front of the Trost district door on the lower right, Takashi noted, "This area is very flat, which is not beneficial for the use of 3-dimensional maneuvering equipment. You might consider configuring that area and setting it up to be beneficial. Thick wooden poles, don't need that many. Dozens of poles are enough for soldiers to move quickly and flee if necessary. Titans generally don't attack trees. With these poles you can set up a defense and counterattack without taking so many casualties. An ideal way would be the warning the soldiers will receive. You need to be quick and concise to evacuate all the people quickly." Commander Pixis' eyes lit up slightly. If Takashi told him to build a stone wall for the artillery tower, he would definitely ignore it. After all, the cost is too high and cannot be considered. No one dares to be completely sure that the titans will attack here, so it would be unwise to invest extra resources that could be useful elsewhere. The commander looked at his subordinate Gustav. "Did you hear? Immediately after the exercise, make sure someone does that task. Remember to make the poles stable and have the soldiers practice mobility. Doing it outside the city would also be beneficial. Considering the danger and advantages, we would definitely come out ahead," Takashi said eloquently. Commander Pixis touched his mustache and nodded understandingly. It may be feasible to dig some holes and place large wooden posts scattered on both sides of the open space in front of the gate. It doesn't cost a lot of money anyway, and it's not impossible to do. Gustav was a little surprised. This is not a high-level suggestion, but it is undeniably something useful. Now the garrison corps could investigate whether it is optimal to leave the city from the gate and place some extra wooden posts in open spaces around the main road. Pixis looked at Takashi. If you want, you can come to me directly after graduation. Someone with your intelligence and observation would be very useful to the garrison corps. This invitation is a standing invitation. Takashi gave a military salute and said, "Thank you, Commander." After that, he said nothing more. He had shared some of the observations he had made when the soldiers acted to defend the Trost district. Now at most he was familiar with the commander of the Exploration Corps, which is beneficial. Takashi used the three-dimensional maneuvering equipment to work off the wall and walked to the temporary station of the training corps in the Trost region. Ha 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 ha. Commander Pixis suddenly burst out laughing. Commander Pixis' escort, Gustav, gave Pixis a puzzled look. Now that I remember, a certain captain in the Exploration Corps asked a series of questions about a boy with the last name Ackerman. He was just curious. Commander Pixis said with a smile. Will you really take that recruit's words seriously? Gustav was still doubtful. Yes. Is it surprising? All the garrison troops have been preparing to receive an attack at any moment, but no one has mentioned what that recruit said just now. Pixis paused for a moment. According to the defense plan, the garrison corps soldiers would attack outside the wall first. How long would that last? Pixis explained, if there are structures that can facilitate mobility outside and inside the main gate, the losses would be less and we will most likely hold out longer. Gustav understood Commander Pixis' words and said, that procedure was written long ago. I never thought I could improve the effectiveness of those orders. Everything can be improved in life, you just have to think carefully about the results, Pixis said lightly. Rita, the escort who had so far remained silent, pondered for a moment. She was not clear if the commander asked Takashi, if the city is really pierced by the Titans, it will be useful for the garrison corps in charge of protecting the gate, but even if it doesn't work, there is nothing to lose. Rita didn't think that if the Titans breached the city gate, the garrison corps didn't necessarily have to fight in the open space in front of the gate. To be honest, she felt that this suggestion was a bit daring for a recruit who has no consideration about costs and time. No one can blame her. She did not know that there were people with the ability to become Titans. Gustav has similar ideas, but his assessment is higher. He also seems to know that we can't spend too much time and money to build a line of defense that may not be useful. I must say that the idea itself is fine. Considering he is only a recruit of no more than 14 years old, I think he is pretty good. At least he's willing to think and share those thoughts openly. As a member of Commander Pixis' escort group, Gustav was well aware that many recruits weren't really bad, considering many veterans had been wasting their time. In recent years, after the fall of the Maria Wall, the veterans trained more. Now, in the use of three-dimensional maneuver equipment, they may not be as good as the recruits who have been training for a long time, in terms of combat experience. None of the veterans have any experience, so at the end of the day there is no struggle difference in that regard. But the recruits also have some problems. Many recruits are reckless and go to the battlefield without considering the consequences. Some even disobey orders. Pixis made no comment after hearing it. For some reason, he felt that these dozens of thick wooden poles could be really useful. On the other hand, when Takashi returned, he discovered that Sasha, Connie and Reiner went out and curiously returned with meat. The confused Takashi observed all the chaos and asked what was going on. It turns out that after Sasha and Jean decided to have a formal showdown in the kitchen, they both thought of working with their own ingredients. If they both had meat, then definitely their dishes would be more popular than a vegetarian dish. So Jean and Sasha went in two different groups to hunt not far from the Trost district. Although Jean is a local, he is not familiar with the forest terrain and also does not know how to hunt, so Sasha took the lead in this small phase of their competitiveness. Entering the kitchen of the dimly lit temporary training corps base, Takashi saw Annie and Armin sitting at a table. This time they worked in the same squadron due to the reduction of recruits. Jean and Sasha would have a cooking competition, so he could give them both a few tips. Jean was in a very bad mood. She slammed the table in frustration, accidentally knocked over the cup and spilled water on her pants. Squeak. At that moment, a soldier from the garrison corps suddenly opened the door and walked in. Is Jean Kirstein here? Jean immediately stood up. I'm here. The garrison corps soldier looked at Jean. Your mother is here, she is looking for you. After saying that, he left immediately. Not long after, an adult lady of short stature entered the kitchen with a basket. Mrs. Kirstein is a short, stocky, adult woman with long brown hair tied in a ponytail. Like an average Trost citizen, she wears a plain dress covered with a red apron. Jean Kirstein, Mother is here. Why don't you go home and stay for a while? Mr. Wagner said Thomas and his friend went to his house for a visit. Mrs. Kirstein winced a little at the sight of her son. Is this Jean's mother? It looks like it. She looks normal. Very nice, unlike her son, they all whispered, making their mother seem like a nice lady. Jean was looking at his mother angrily. Many teenagers in their younger years despise the care and concern of their parents. The normal at this age is that not many are mature enough to appreciate every little extra detail and breath their mother and father gives. Many of the young people in this situation would be very embarrassed by what others think. The attentive mother found the water stain on her son's pants and reached out to wipe it up. Jean cried out in embarrassment and anger, "Stop it, I told you to come back." Stopping his mother, Jean looked overly agitated. Jean's mother was surprised for a moment. She looked at the people who had focused their eyes in her direction, smiled kindly and took some apples out of the basket. "Thank you for taking care of my family, Kirstein. Here are some fruits for you to eat." Jean finally couldn't take it anymore, and reached out her hand to put the fruit back in the basket, and then shoo her annoying mother away. Takashi grabbed Jean's hand and Jean was surprised when he saw Takashi standing next to him at some unknown time. Takashi looked at Jean's mother and smiled. "Thank you, ma'am, for the gift. Jean has been a little tired from training recently and is in a bad mood. Your son talks a lot about your excellent food and commented to me that he would try to visit you in a few days." Jean's mother seemed to realize that her son was not very welcoming to her. She flashed a gentle smile. "My son can become very direct. Thank you for your good comments." Jean's mother, Mrs. Kirstein, put a box of food on the table and some fruit. "Son, this is a meal I prepared for you. I'm leaving first. Remember to get along with everyone." Jean didn't know what to say. Takashi stopped himself from getting angry with his mother, and when he regained his composure, he was also aware that his attitude was very bad. "Mrs. Kirstein, walk carefully on your way back." Takashi politely said goodbye. Jean's mother left. Although her son has reached the stage of rebelliousness and no longer liked his mother taking care of him, at least she found that her son still made some reliable friends. Holding the box of food with one hand, Takashi smiled with mixed feelings and put the apples in Jean's hands. "What are you looking at? Don't you know you're making people uncomfortable? Haven't you ever seen a mother take care of her child? If they want an apple, they can ask Jean for it," Takashi said with a wry smile. Eren and Mikasa, who weren't far away, looked away. Eren couldn't bear his feelings at this moment either. Thinking about his mother, Eren lowered his head. As a child, he often fought with people and did not like to see his mother. In the blink of an eye, some annoying mothers could not be seen. Mikasa put her hand on Eren's shoulder and comforted him. "Jean, some of this place no longer has an annoying mother to fight with. Take good care of your mother and make sure you can go visit her. Don't forget to eat her food. We never know when we might get eaten by titans." Takashi gave a forced smile and patted Jean's shoulder. He missed his parents too. He had many moments when he cried at night and didn't know what to do. Why keep fighting in this world? Only then Takashi remembered that other people had their loved ones in this world, so he would do his best to make less mothers mourn the loss of their children. Takashi pushed him to the corner to sit down, where Annie and Armin were also sitting. He changed the subject and asked, "What's wrong? I heard they couldn't hunt anything." Armin also came too. "We didn't get any prey. Now that it's getting late, it's hard for us to beat Sasha's dish that carries meat." Annie looked at Takashi. She didn't communicate much with Takashi, except for a few fights in wrestling class. She stayed silent and didn't speak. Even though she was good at cooking simple dishes, she didn't know what to do if she didn't have the right ingredients. At that moment, Jean opened her mother's food box and there was nothing in it. It was just a simple omelette, which was his favorite food as a child. Looking at the rice omelette carefully prepared by his mother, Jean was silent for a moment and said, "I know what to do." Both Armin and Annie looked at Jean with surprise. Except for the meat in the food storage, they couldn't think of anything that could defeat the meat Sasha caught, but the food in the food storage was not something they could use. Commander Pixis said they brought their own ingredients. Jean looked at Takashi. "I need to make a vegetarian dish, can you help me?" Takashi smiled confidently. "It's not a problem to advise you under my knowledge. To be honest, I don't think meat is necessarily better than a dish with no meat in it. Commander Pixis said that as long as you guys were cooking, you could get help verbally from others. He had some cooking skills, so he could share his knowledge based on that. As for whether Sasha would be angry, the important thing is to buy her some potatoes at the market and some arrows to hunt with." Time passed slowly. Jean and Takashi were busy in the kitchen, and Armin and Annie helped them with little things. In the evening, on the other side, Aren was struggling to carry a box. He was on duty today, and the training corps naturally had to prepare some supplies when they arrived in the Trost region to participate in the exercise. Aren tried several times, but it wouldn't budge, and then he saw Mikasa easily carry 3 identical stacked boxes towards him. "Don't worry, Aren, you're just tired, that's all," Aren said to himself. Mikasa brought down the 3 stacked boxes, and when he saw that Aren couldn't move it, he wanted to come help. Aren reached out to stop her. He gritted his teeth and moved it by himself. He didn't believe it, he couldn't even carry a single box. Some people think Aren is single because of his tiny strength, but to some extent, Mikasa is also single because of great strength. Takashi. "I'm strong, I can cook, I'm handsome and I can fight. What about my love life, isn't there a solution for that?" In the kitchen, Jean is cooking the omelette with great excitement. This is her favorite and most familiar dish. She doesn't know if she can win in the end, so she does her best without caring about the outcome. On the other side of the kitchen, Takashi washes the potatoes and cuts the onions, puts them in a pot of hot water and lets them cook. This recipe is similar to one he remembers. It has salt, potatoes, onions, garlic, oil and eggs. In the evening, in the kitchen, Armin looked at the onion mixed with the egg and the sweet potatoes with rice, his eyes showing hesitation at the vegetable mixture. It's not that Armin is not confident, but Sasha has meat. Meat is something valuable and unattainable for many people. Will that alone be enough to beat her? Jean didn't speak. He wasn't sure. After all, the ingredients were so different. Annie looked at Takashi with a calm face and said, "How sure are you?" Takashi was confident in everything he did without showing any hesitation and explained, "All things considered, is eating a dish with meat late at night satisfying? Still, the decision is not in our hands, so anything can happen. Commander Pixis may think Jean's dish is good, or on the other hand Sasha's. It depends on the commander's preference. We have a 50-50 chance of winning." Takashi pointed to the sweet potatoes in a small bowl mixed with the onion and garlic. "At least our taste isn't bad." Annie and Armin's eyes lit up slightly. In fact, Jean and Sasha's cooking is the latter. The commander's taste is the key to winning this competition. Sasha's side was a little slower. The rabbit meat she caught was slow to prepare. Sasha tried to replicate the dish Takashi made that time they went hunting. She added some salt and started frying the meat. Connie looked at the fragrant and incomparably tempting chicken meat. He swallowed saliva and said confidently, "This is a sure win." Reiner was also more confident. Someone saw that Takashi was going to help Jean, but it shouldn't matter, they didn't get any meat. How could they lose if they got meat? Sasha is full of confidence. "Don't worry, the meat is invincible. I know Takashi is very good at cooking, but they don't have any potential ingredients." After all, Jean didn't catch any meat, so Sasha wasn't worried about losing. This competition is stable. In the evening, after all the soldiers finished their duties, they gathered in the mess hall to witness the competition of 2 of the training corps recruits. Right at 11 o'clock at night, Commander Pixis was sitting at a table. The instructor next to him announced to the recruits and some of the soldiers of the garrison corps to watch silently. The saucer showdown between Sasha Blouse and Jean Kirstein begins. "Oh." The crowd cheered. "Who do you think will win?" "Sasha. Jean doesn't seem to know how to cook, and they didn't get any prey in the afternoon." Many saw Takashi, Armin and Annie helping Jean to prepare her dish. "Takashi and Annie are good at cooking. Maybe with their help, Jean can win." Haha. "So far I realize that Takashi can do anything except having a girlfriend." Ha ha ha. "Thomas, if your squad leader hears you, he'll kill you." "That Sasha wasn't his girlfriend. I heard Ymir say it in the stable at the training corps base." "I don't know, but I respect Takashi. The difference in ingredients is too big. Unless Commander Pixis is vegan, it would be impossible to win." There was a lot of discussion in the audience, and it was lively. Jean and Sasha had already pushed the food cart into the dining room and the food was covered. Takashi didn't go with Jean. Annie and Armin went up with Jean to support him, but he was just watching the amusing development from afar. He also heard the silly Thomas just now. He decided to go back and train Thomas under hellish conditions. All for the sake of his friend. He is so careless, he must be strong. It would be bad if he was killed at the hands of Titans. Sasha served the food first. She lifted the lid and placed a rabbit dish. It was full of amazing color and smell. It was very tempting at first sight. Gulu, everyone in the audience was a little excited. "I suddenly feel a little hungry." "Me too, I should have filled my stomach with bread." No suspense now. "It's been 5 years since I tasted meat. In all that time I forgot what it tastes like." Pixis' eyes lit up behind the dining table. He cut a piece of meat with a knife and put it in his mouth with the help of a fork. Pixis said, "It's good, it's delicious, and it's like slashing titans on the battlefield." "What kind of assessment is that?" Takashi went blank at Pixis' words. After eating a few more bites, he paused and then let Jean approach with the dining cart. She set the plate on the table, lifted the lid, and the contents inside are very ordinary: a small pile of rice tortilla and a small bowl of an unknown sauce. Everyone in the audience suddenly fell silent, a little confused. "This is too common. I can do it with just wheat." Pixis smiled and said nothing. He slowly ate the omelette, and from time to time used a spoon to take a bit of the rice. He was slowly finishing the dish in its entirety. Wiping his mouth with a napkin, the commander slowly stood up and announced in front of everyone in the audience, "The winner of this cooking showdown is Jean Kirkstein." The coaches below the stage suddenly became noisy. My God! This result could have been turned around. The meat lost its value. It's a victory for the meatless kitchen. We poor people triumphed. Jean was also a little surprised. He really won. Sasha was stunned and unconvinced. She ran to the commander and asked, "Commander, why is this meat?" Pixis didn't get angry and looked at Sasha calmly. "Yes, it's meat, but it's just meat. It's a little uncomfortable to eat meat at night if you can't digest it." Sasha reacted and sat on the floor with a haggard face. "Did I forget to add the fixings? The potatoes and carrots I've always loved." But in the end all the meat was finished. Jean reached over and reached out to pull the surprised Sasha. Sasha thought Jean would tease her, but Jean comforted her. This time, the culinary confrontation came to an unexpected end. At 12 o'clock at night, Jean left for home, back to the house she hadn't been back to in 2 years. Dong dong. There was a knock at the door, and Jean's mother opened the door suspiciously and saw her son. "I'm back, Mom." "What a surprise, come in the house, it's cold, son." Homeless Jean returned home and found that he still had nothing in common with his mother, but at least he was happy to be able to spend time with his family. At the same time, Takashi was sitting outside the training corps base in the Trost district. "What a sad day. It comforts me that the stars are looking down on my frail figure." Takashi smiled slightly. He had a powerful Susanoo, but was hesitant to use it. He had friends but felt lonely. Today he felt his mother's absence more than ever. "Am I crying?" Takashi wiped the tears from his eyes in embarrassment. "You fucking loser, you're in an unbelievable world." "Takashi." A voice was heard far away in the darkness. "Sasha?" Takashi was surprised to see Sasha with a happy expression. In her hands, she held a small plate with food. "Come before we are discovered. See what I have in store for you," Sasha said with a smile. Holding out his hands, Takashi looked at a rabbit leg on the plate. "You saved it for me?" Takashi asked with inexplicable feelings. "I thought you'd like it. It was the only thing I could leave for you without anyone seeing me." Sasha flashed a nervous smile. "Thanks, but I can't finish it alone." Takashi pulled Sasha to a corner and they sat in silence. He took the rabbit leg and with the help of a knife split the leg in 2 parts. "No, I saved it for you." Sasha stopped her words when a piece of the rabbit leg suddenly entered his mouth. Helplessly, Takashi took his share and ate it silently. "Your dish tastes amazing, for me it was the best." Takashi smiled slightly. "Liar, it's cold and doesn't taste good anymore." Sasha thought to herself, not thinking much about the things others say about Takashi and her. The next day was another half-day exercise. In the afternoon everyone packed up, followed instructor Keith out of the Trost district and back to the Rose Wall. Takashi raised his head and looked up at the instantly widening sky, and a feeling of freshness spontaneously arose. "I must say that although the Trost is a good place to live, it is a bit small. The 50-meter-high city wall always brings a depressing cage-like feeling. The space inside the Rose Wall is much larger, but compared to the outside world, even the place is too small." The sunset was turning red. In front, the base of the training corps was already visible to the naked eye. Jean walked to Takashi's side and said, "Thanks for yesterday." Takashi smiled. "You're welcome. I mean, if you hadn't stopped me yesterday, I would have gotten really angry for no reason and kicked my mother out." Jean smiled reassuringly. "It's normal to act like this at our age. As we all grow up we all have problems with our parents. However, it's our duty to stop and start appreciating every extra day our parents live. Just be careful in the future. Become a military policeman and take your parents to the center of the city." Jean Kirkstein sighed and said, "Yesterday I visited my home. I still felt inexplicably strange, but your words made me calm down and spend a quiet moment together with them." After a short silence, Takashi pointed out, "It's less than a year to graduate." "Yes, let's work hard." In the evening, Thomas lay down on his bunk and grumbled, "The drill is finally over." Takashi, did you hear that? In the future, all days off will be cancelled and only 2 days will be taken at the end of each month. Takashi was doing push-ups on the lower bunk and said without taking much breath, "It's normal, we have to leave the base in January next year and graduate directly there after 3 months of internship in your hometown trust, by then you can go home every day." Well, what I mean is that I want to take a break. After all, no matter how much I practice, I have no hope of being a military police officer. This year, because of Takashi, a guy who didn't exist before, the competition has become more intense. Although Takashi is sometimes evaluated lower than first place, he is sure to be in the top 10. Thomas is not bad, but it's hard to get into the top 10. This year is really a battle of giants. If Thomas is in the training corps up north, maybe he could be in the top 10 from that base. It's good to get used to it, isn't it just training? Thomas said, "It's good to train, but it's also good to rest. I'm not like you, practicing boxing and push-ups every night, aren't you tired?" Takashi completed the 4th set of 100 push-ups and stopped to rest. "Fortunately, I'm not tired from training." Thomas stopped talking and Takashi successfully finished the conversation, then practiced his chakra control method. Time flew by. Time flew until the end of October 849. The close combat training has finished. After the physical training in the morning there was a military theory class where they learned many things such as the operation and maintenance of the cannons, how to reinforce and patrol the walls among other things. In an open space outside the training corps base, there was a long row of cannons and there was an instructor standing in front of everyone. As a soldier, it is also necessary to learn the exact use of artillery. You will learn that shells can stop titans. The correct use of this weapon by people can kill titans. Howitzers even then still have a low hit rate. After the instructor finished talking about the power and use of various shells, he told everyone how to handle it and personally tested how to operate it. What precautions should be taken? In fact, the theoretical class in the previous 3 weeks has been discussing these kinds of questions, but now it is only based on the real object. Okay. Start the operation by squad. Ask questions if you don't understand, and be careful not to hurt anyone. After the instructor finished speaking, he instructed everyone to begin, and some of the male soldiers couldn't wait. This is the actual cannon operation under their own hands. There are a total of 8 guns on the field, and 6 people from 7 squadron are trying to fire artillery shells. Nelson put an ordinary shell into the cannon and Thomas was about to pull the strap. "Cover your ears." Takashi reminded everyone, who were a little quiet. Many were not used to the roar of this gun. Krista and the others covered their ears with their hands. Bang. With a loud noise, the cannonball slammed into the open space in front of him, raising a cloud of smoke and dust. Takashi only felt his head buzzing. The cannon wasn't very powerful, but it was loud enough to deafen him. "This gun is really powerful," Daz said in a shaky voice. Ymir shook her head and scolded, "Damn, this thing is really loud." Krista then withdrew her hands and breathed a sigh of relief. After a few more operations, their training for this class was over. It took them about an hour and a half to familiarize themselves with the use of cannons. Because there are only 8 cannons, the other squadrons were divided into 6 different classes to operate the cannons. After Takashi's group left, the second batch of squadrons started to leave. At this time, someone came to ask Krista, who had finished learning, for advice. Krista smiled and ran to help. Watching Krista endure the huge roar of the artillery fire, force a smile and enthusiastically help instruct everyone on how to operate the cannon, Takashi frowned. This girl was seriously ill. "Do you mind?" Takashi said to Ymir. Touching her forehead with her hand, Ymir felt a headache. "I can't control it, she always seems to be helpful. Even if she can't stand the loud noise of cannonballs, whenever someone asks her for advice, she will run to help others. There are many similar things, I can only deal with those guys who have ulterior motives, but I'm not qualified to make the decisions for her on some things." "Really?" Takashi looked at this scene expressionlessly. After a while, he couldn't take it anymore and went straight to Krista. "Takashi, what's wrong?" Krista, who had been pushed aside by Takashi, looked at him with her blue eyes suspiciously. Looking slightly at Krista, Takashi advised, "If you don't like to do things, don't force yourself, they can ask the instructor directly for their doubts." He is not against Krista helping others, if she enjoys it, he would never interfere. But obviously she couldn't stand the loud noise of the cannon fire, and forced herself to help others despite that. Krista hesitated, "But I was asked to help, I should." Interrupting Krista's words, he said bluntly, "You don't need to live like others need. You should know that many people admire you and love you very much." After a pause, Takashi said solemnly, you know a big secret of mine and I don't like that behavior you have. I don't like you being like that. It makes me feel uncomfortable. Krista panicked, I'm sorry, did I do something wrong? Takashi shook his head, no, in fact, this will be the first and last time you get advice on this situation from here on out. Everyone praises you for being a good person, but are you happy? Why do you always act soft in front of all the people expecting to be loved? If you don't like it, don't do it. But. We should be nice to people and help each other. Krista was a little overwhelmed. There's nothing wrong with being nice. I can't tell you a good reason, but I hope to see you be yourself. Don't force yourself to act like that in front of others. We will always be hated by other people. That's a natural thing, and no matter how well we act, in the end we can't do anything about it. Krista's eyes dodged, she lowered her head and remained silent. You know very well that me and Ymir are delighted. We have certain difficulties. As friends we hope to see you act normally. Ymir's expression was helpless, and she crossed his arms around his chest, not that she didn't convince her, but it didn't help. Takashi, I'm sorry. I want to ask you something. Do your parents like you? Krista looked at Takashi with red eyes. Slightly dumbfounded, Takashi didn't understand why the goddess Krista suddenly asked this. When he was still on Earth, his mother was similar to Jean's mother. As for the previous Takashi, he was an orphan. And Takashi's identity now is a bit more complicated. Dad. Why are we moving to a forest? Will we leave uncle alone? Takashi, as a child, looked at his father with a confused expression. Touching little Takashi's head, Takashi's father said, I don't know either, just know that I'm doing it to protect you from this cruel and evil world. Remember that, son, remember to fight only for you and nothing else for you. What about my mother? Oh, your mother was weak and died shortly after giving birth to you. Takashi's father looked at his son with a somber expression. That rainy day, Takashi and his father left their home and headed for the forest, where until before arriving at the Cycle 104 training corps he lived. Suddenly, Takashi held his head in pain. A series of memories began to invade his mind uncontrollably. Is it sure he won't die? You don't know if it will turn out that way. I can't risk my son in this kind of experiment. The tests are done. We only have one chance before we are discovered. Once done, you have to disappear with your son. If it turns out your son will have in his possession the greatest weapon to fight the Titans. After hearing those words, Takashi remembered lying on a kind of stretcher blindfolded. The first person he looked at after that was his father. His eyes were full of worry and he was only glad when he woke up. Sleep now, son. You don't need to remember these painful moments. Just think about forgetting. You must forget. When you turn 15, I will tell you about how special your power is, Takashi's father said. What power are you talking about? Takashi came to himself and then looked at Krista. My parents died at an early age. I couldn't have a mother's love for a long time and I don't remember my father's appearance very well. But if there's one thing I'm sure of, it would be that all parents love their children. Krista stared at Takashi. Really? All the books say that a mother loves her child, but my mother doesn't love me. She wanted me dead. On that farm it happened. Suddenly, the atmosphere became silent, and Ymir looked at Krista in shock. She didn't know before. Krista stopped talking. She was the only one who still kept secrets with Takashi and Ymir. She was the only one who knew of their biggest secrets, so she wanted to share in a certain way with them. With a sigh, Takashi looked at Krista with regret. The title of mother is not for the one who raises you or begets you. The title of mother is given to that woman who takes care of her children regardless of life's consequences. If she gave birth to you and does not show that love, she is not your mother. Being a mother is not only a blood connection, but also love and understanding. Don't blame yourself for that. I didn't have a mother and most certainly many other people didn't experience that feeling either. Let's live for ourselves and stop thinking about the past. We have to work hard for the present, Takashi said with a forlorn smile. Krista burst into tears. Ymir didn't speak and hugged her tightly. She knew that she and Takashi were different from Krista. They are a time bomb that could explode at any moment without the possibility of escaping that explosion. Thomas and Nelson were surprised to see Krista cry. They knew Krista's identity, but were shocked to hear that her mother wanted her to die, which was too cruel for Krista, who was a child at the time. With a somewhat indifferent expression, Takashi looked at Thomas and Nelson. You've heard it all. Pay attention in the future. We can't control many things and we can't make decisions for Krista. But if there are those guys taking advantage of her kindness, crush them hard. Yes. They both nodded. The barrage of artillery fire continued, and the conversation here was only heard by everyone in the 7th Squadron. Daz didn't speak. He couldn't say any words of comfort for Krista and just watched. Takashi is no mentor about life. To be honest, he needs someone to tell him he is doing well in this place. But if he can do something for others, he will do it without much thought. In this world, you can't stay in misery. If you live in the past and don't strive to build a present, death will slowly embrace and you won't be able to do anything about it.